The case of Rosa Peral. Vinuela, a body in flames. A love triangle typically leads to no good, with all involved parties inevitably suffering as each one becomes dependent. The very emergence of a new participant in a relationship signals trouble in the couple's interaction. Yet some believe that monogamy is a thing of the past, advocating for relationships where one is not limited in the number of loved ones. Such was the belief of our protagonist today, who shattered the lives and destinies of the men unfortunate enough to be close to her. The case of Rosa Peral Vinuela caused quite a stir in Spain a few years ago. This woman easily entered into relationships, manipulated men by playing with their feelings, and then got rid of her tiresome lovers using harsh, sometimes radical methods. Intriguingly, she worked in law enforcement and often engaged in workplace romances. Rosa was blessed with attractive looks, which she used to her advantage. She had been in an official marriage, was the center of an intimate scandal, and was simultaneously engaged to 2 different men. However, these adventures were not enough for her. She dared to commit a crime against a weary fiancé, attempting to pin the blame on her ex-husband and a lover. The most horrifying aspect was that her own child witnessed this appalling act. Rosa Peral, the early years. Rosa Peral. Vinuela was born on October 15, 1985, in a suburb of Barcelona, becoming the second child in her family. She grew up in a modest household that had migrated from Andalusia in search of a better life. Her mother, Maria, was a homemaker dedicated to creating a cozy home environment and raising the children, while her father, Francisco, worked as a security guard. Rosa was raised alongside her older brother, Paul, with whom she was very close. Those personally acquainted with her described Rosa as sweet, kind-hearted, and friendly. Neighbors spoke highly of the Peral family, considering them a united, strong, and happy household. In school, Rosa was a good student. She wasn't necessarily at the top of her class, but was diligent and persistent, always striving for high grades. She was also active in sports and dreamed of a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, she enrolled at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, while simultaneously preparing for the exams and tests required to enter the police academy in Avila. Rosa was strikingly attractive and possessed a powerful charisma, which attracted many admirers from a young age. She skillfully leveraged her allure. During her college years, she worked as a waitress in one of the popular nightclubs, earning a decent salary and tips that allowed her to pay for her education independently. At that time, Rosa was dating a young man named Ruben Carbo, who served in the Barcelona City Guard. He helped his girlfriend prepare for the competitive examinations at the academy. A talent detection test, a multiple-choice exam, and an oral interview. Although Rosa didn't pass the physical test on her first try, her perseverance paid off, and she was eventually admitted to the academy, where she underwent professional training. Peral specialized in general law enforcement activities. She quickly advanced in her career, was highly valued at her service, and her salary allowed her to live comfortably without wanting for anything. A valued employee, a stellar wife and mother. Soon after graduating from the police academy, the young woman married her beloved Ruben. The couple had a modest wedding attended only by their closest relatives and friends. The newlyweds moved to Barcelona, where they soon welcomed 2 daughters, one after the other. At work, Rosa was regarded as a responsible, disciplined, and promising employee. Her attractive and approachable appearance often led to her participation in social media videos broadcasted on local television. In these videos, she encouraged residents and visitors of the city to behave lawfully and with integrity. She even gained some popularity, with people sometimes recognizing her on the street. Rosa was successful in her career, respected and valued as an employee, and at the same time, she was a loving wife and a caring mother to her 2 children. She had an impeccable reputation, inspiring genuine admiration and even envy among those around her. However, no one could have imagined the double life she was leading until one incident. An intimate scandal and the collapse of a reputation. In early 2011, Rosa's colleagues began receiving emails containing photographs and videos of a personal nature. The images showed the married Peral engaging in intimate moments with her former partner, Junior Inspector Oscar Lefs, at their place of work. Outraged by her lover's actions, Rosa immediately filed a complaint with the police, demanding compensation for emotional distress and strict legal action against the perpetrator. However, it proved impossible to establish that Oscar was indeed the one who sent out the photos and videos, though Rosa had no doubts about it, and he avoided any repercussions. Nonetheless, both employees were demoted and transferred to different departments for their inappropriate behavior. Moreover, the distribution of compromising materials did not cease, with not only colleagues but also friends and relatives of Rosa receiving them. A serious scandal erupted, and Rosa's previously impeccable reputation was shattered. The situation had a negative impact on her work, family life, and relationships with colleagues and friends. The young woman was acutely aware that she was being judged by everyone around her, and her actions became one of the most discussed topics. Furthermore, some expressed their disapproval of her immoral actions directly to her face. Rosa's character began to deteriorate rapidly. From a friendly, sociable person, she turned into someone perceived as harsh and even spiteful. However, many rightly considered this transformation a defensive reaction to the bullying and condemnation she faced. Surprisingly, despite such a scandalous and resonant ordeal, Rosa managed to maintain her marriage with Ruben. Yet, the trust between them was irreparably damaged. They stayed together for almost another year and a half until a new romantic interest entered Rosa's life. Another workplace romance and professional misconduct around mid-2012, it became known about Rosa's new romance with another colleague, Albert Lopez Ferrero. The couple spent a significant amount of time trying to keep their relationship under wraps, but between 2011 and 2012, they became involved in several incidents related to the abuse of their official powers. During the investigations into these incidents, the partners and lovers protected each other, which allowed them both to evade any disciplinary actions. It's worth noting that Albert was reserved, shared little about himself, and didn't make close friends among his colleagues. He was seriously into boxing and had a quick temper, which sometimes made him very aggressive, often to the detriment of those who happened to be near him at the wrong time. For instance, in 2011, while he and Rosa were patrolling the streets of Barcelona, Ferrero got into an argument with an immigrant from Senegal who was selling goods on the street without the necessary permit. Instead of taking the vendor to the station, after a brief verbal altercation, Ferrero physically assaulted him, causing severe injuries. However, during the subsequent investigation, Peral defended her lover, claiming that the victim had attacked him first and that he was merely defending himself. Another similar incident occurred, and in 2012, a suspect that Rosa and Albert were supposed to bring to the station mysteriously lost his life during the arrest. The investigation led nowhere, and the partners insisted that the fault lay solely with the deceased himself. Eventually, their version of events was accepted, and the case was dismissed due to a lack of evidence of any wrongdoing. As for the relationship between the two, it could be described as sporadic. The lovers grew closer through their work together, but their passion ebbed and flowed. Albert showed little interest in Rosa beyond physical intimacy. Their affair didn't progress but continued for several years without ending. It seems that both were content with this arrangement. Divorce and a new love triangle. When Rosa and Albert's relationship was no longer a secret, Ruben finally decided to divorce his unfaithful wife, realizing she would never change and would continue to seek other romantic encounters whenever the opportunity arose. The couple managed to avoid public scandals and bitter confrontations, but their parting could hardly be called amicable. Ruben soon entered into a serious relationship with a woman named Antonia, who quickly found common ground not only with his daughters, but also with his ex-wife. Rosa often called Ruben's new partner, sharing her personal disappointments and professional troubles. Antonia listened calmly, offered comfort and even advice. For Antonia, This communication was a sort of assurance that Ruben had no lingering ties to his ex-wife and that their relationship was truly over. Regarding custody, the daughters stayed with their mother, but Ruben was allowed to see them any time and take them home for weekends and holidays. After the divorce, Rosa chose not to continue her relationship with Albert, feeling it was leading nowhere. However, she soon started a new romance with Pedro Rodriguez, who had long shown a keen interest in her and had been actively courting her. Little was known about Pedro. He was born in Barcelona in 1979, where he spent his childhood and most of his adult life. He also worked in law enforcement, albeit in the transportation department, so their professional paths rarely crossed. At the time he met Rosa, Pedro was married and raising a 5-year-old son with his wife. Yet, Rosa's allure was irresistible to him. Consumed with thoughts of her day and night, he didn't hesitate to leave his family as soon as she reciprocated his feelings. Adding complexity to the situation was the fact that Pedro was a longtime friend of Albert's. When news of his romance with Rosa became public, the ex-lover was baffled. Driven by a painful jealousy, he began to harass Rosa, demanding explanations for her actions. To defuse the situation, Peral told Ferrero that the connection between her and Rodriguez could never match the chemistry they had shared over the years. This way, she implied to her former lover that she still harbored certain feelings and physical attraction towards him. The resumption of their intimate relationship seemed inevitable, as a definitive end to their saga had yet to be declared. A double engagement Rosa and Pedro seemed to be living more than a blissful life together. Along with Rosa's children, they settled into a spacious home in a nice neighborhood of Barcelona, traveled often, appeared everywhere as a close-knit family, and seemed genuinely happy. Feeling ready for the next step in their relationship, Pedro proposed to Rosa with a beautiful ring, and she joyfully accepted. The couple started planning their wedding. Around the same time, Rosa began secretly meeting with Albert. Typically, they spent time together in hotel rooms on the outskirts of the city to avoid being seen. Rosa even complained to her lover that Pedro didn't quite measure up to him in intimacy. She also mentioned Pedro's difficult personality and expressed doubts about her future happiness with him. In January 2017, Albert, previously indifferent to serious commitments, unexpectedly proposed to Rosa, presenting her with an expensive ring. Remarkably, she accepted his proposal too, wearing the ring secretly from Pedro. The fact of her double engagement greatly flattered Rosa, and she even bragged about it to her closest friends. Soon, Pedro noticed changes in Rosa's behavior, and her frequent absences led him to suspect. Moreover, Rosa found it increasingly difficult to justify her meetups with Albert. This strained Rosa and Pedro's relationship significantly. They argued often, and Rosa's increasingly aggressive and unpredictable behavior alarmed Pedro, making him fear for his safety. Eventually, Albert disclosed his affair with Rosa to his former friend, sparking yet another scandal. Rosa admitted to the betrayal but assured Pedro it was a one-time incident, driven by threats and pressure from Albert. Pedro pretended to believe her, not wanting to end their engagement, still hoping for a future of happiness together. However, from that point on, he began to monitor her every move, or at least that's what she told everyone. Pedro's fate-sealed Rosa claimed that her fiancé's jealousy was unbearable. He scrutinized her phone calls, monitored her social media interactions, and restricted her from spending time with friends. This behavior infuriated her, and any affection she once had for Pedro had vanished. Instead of confronting him or ending the engagement, Rosa devised a drastic plan to eliminate her troublesome fiancé. She decided to end his life, with Albert playing a pivotal role in this scheme, ready to be the fall guy if anything went awry. In mid-April 2017, Rosa confided her plans to her lover. She outlined that Pedro needed to be removed in such a manner that Ruben would appear to be the primary suspect. This was Rosa's way of retaliating against her ex-husband, who was still fighting for custody of their children. Notably, at this time, her fiancé was undergoing rehabilitation from a complex spinal surgery, during which a titanium plate had been inserted. the conspirators meticulously prepared for their heinous act. Rosa purchased a disposable phone, which she planned to dispose of immediately after the deed was done. They also pre-discussed the details and alternative plans in case any part of their original scheme proved unfeasible. Lovers and accomplices. On the night of April 30th, Rosa prepared a farewell romantic dinner for her fiancé. They spent the evening together, with Pedro blissfully unaware that he had less than a day to live. The following day, Sunday, they went shopping together, visited Rosa's parents, and then headed to her ex-husband's house to pick up the girls who had been staying with him for the weekend. At home, Rosa fed the children and then sent them to their room on the second floor, asking them to stay upstairs. The exact moment Albert entered the house remains unclear, as the accounts from those involved have repeatedly changed and contradicted one another. It is known that Rosa drugged Pedro with an unidentified substance mixed into a water-diluted medication he was taking post-surgery to alleviate pain. Shortly after consuming this mixture, Pedro's reaction became significantly delayed. He struggled with spatial orientation, moved slowly, and had poor cognitive function, making him an easy target. The exact method by which the lovers ended Pedro's life remains unclear, but one of Rosa's daughters, who ventured downstairs amidst the noise, claimed she saw her mother push him down the stairs. However, the court did not take the 6-year-old girl's words into account. Regardless, after the act, the couple placed Rodriguez's body in the trunk of a previously rented car to dispose of it later. There was also speculation that the man was still alive at that moment. The accomplices then drove the car to a deserted marshland outside the city, placed the body in the driver's seat, doused everything in a flammable liquid, and set it ablaze. Rosa thoughtfully left Pedro's phone at the scene, and upon returning home, she called it several times and sent messages begging for forgiveness and asking him to come back. Remains in a burned car. The morning after the incident, Rosa called her father, Francisco, sobbing into the phone, claiming that she and Pedro had a major argument. She told him that Pedro had ended their engagement, stated he no longer wanted to see her, and drove off in his car without specifying his destination. Rosa also reached out to several of Pedro's close friends and relatives, inquiring if they had seen him. She tearfully narrated their dispute and separation to everyone. For 3 days there was no word from Rodriguez, but on the afternoon of May 4th, a young cyclist riding outside the city stumbled upon a burned vehicle containing human bones. He immediately reported his find to the police, and soon an investigative team was at the scene. The car contained severely charred human remains that were unidentifiable. However, a titanium plate recently implanted in the man's spine helped in identifying him. This implant had a unique serial number, which was used to confirm the remains were Pedro's. Based on the car's location and the nature of the fire, investigators concluded that the vehicle had been intentionally set ablaze, and the driver had either been prevented from escaping or was already deceased at the time of the fire. Given these circumstances, the case was classified as a deliberate act of ending a life. An investigation was launched, the details of which were kept confidential until the trial. Investigation and suspects. Once the remains were identified, police officers were dispatched to Rosa's residence to deliver the tragic news of her fiancé's fate. She attempted to feign shock and grief, but her expression quickly reverted to an indifferent calm as she responded to routine inquiries. Her demeanor was oddly composed for someone who had just been informed of her fiancé's demise. Rosa refused to go to the police station, claiming she had no one to watch her children, and also denied the officers entry to her home to avoid alarming her daughters. However, she immediately suggested to the officers that her ex-husband, Ruben, could be involved in her fiancé's demise, driven by jealousy. This accusation promptly placed Ruben among the primary suspects, but he soon provided a solid alibi, having spent several days in another city with Antonia, visiting her parents after picking up the girls with Rosa. Rosa herself became a suspect next. Her remarkable calm and detachment raised eyebrows. Yet, aiming to stay ahead, she voluntarily went to the station and suggested her former lover, Albert, as the perpetrator. According to Rosa, he had been harassing her, demanding she break off the engagement with Pedro to marry him instead, and had become enraged and threatening after her refusal. When police arrested Albert as a suspect, he immediately began testifying against Rosa, implicating her as the mastermind and executor of the crime. He disclosed that it was Rosa who had orchestrated the entire plot, including drugging Pedro to incapacitate him, making him an easy target. Rosa was arrested the same day based on this revelation. Trial and sentences. During interrogations, the lovers provided wildly different accounts of the events on that fateful evening. They desperately tried to shift blame onto each other. Their stories were inconsistent, and they struggled to accurately reconstruct the sequence of events. The investigation lasted nearly a year, with law enforcement painstakingly attempting to piece together the crime scene. It became clear that the pair had premeditated the act, indicating it was intentional and planned rather than spontaneous. Despite this, the woman maintained her innocence. She claimed that Albert showed up at her and Pedro's doorstep that evening, armed and irrational. Upon seeing her enraged ex-lover, she fled upstairs, fearing for her daughter's safety and attempting to protect them. At this moment, she alleged, Ferrero carried out the act on her fiancé. Mobile phone data played a crucial role in the investigation. Despite Rosa's belief that they had covered their tracks, investigators discovered she had communicated with her lover using disposable phones on the day of the incident. Additionally, Albert's personal phone was tracked near the location of the burned vehicle on the night of May 1st. The trial of the accused pair didn't begin until February 2020. Despite the woman's attempts to portray herself as a victim, Ferrero's attorney argued that his client only assisted her in disposing of the body, suggesting she was the mastermind behind the entire operation. He described Rosa as a cunning manipulator, capable of using others for her own ends. Antonia, now raising her and Ruben's daughters with him, also testified, reiterating that the older daughter witnessed her mother pushing a bloodied Pedro down the stairs. However, the child's statement was not taken into consideration. Yet, Rosa accused her of lying, claiming Antonia simply wanted to see her imprisoned for as long as possible out of jealousy. In March 2020, both suspects were found guilty of premeditated ending of life and concealing evidence of the crime. Rosa was sentenced to 25 years in prison, while Albert received a 20-year sentence. Additionally, they were ordered to pay nearly 100,000 euros in moral damages to Rodriguez's family. However, as it turned out, all of Rosa's assets were registered in her parents' names, rendering her financially insolvent. Following the verdict, both convicts made numerous appeals, each maintaining their innocence. However, the Supreme Court of Catalonia rejected these appeals, leaving the sentences unchanged. The aftermath for those involved. Rosa's parents, despite the guilty verdict, never believed their daughter was capable of committing such a heinous act. Now the children's biological father, Ruben Carbo, officially serves as their guardian. He raises the daughters from his previous marriage alongside his wife Antonia, with whom he also has a son. Notably, Ruben has always allowed the girls to maintain contact with their maternal grandparents. Interestingly, following Rosa's arrest in 2017, she was only able to see her daughters nearly 2 years later, in the spring of 2019, under the supervision of Ruben and his current wife. However, he has since refrained from bringing the girls to prison visits, believing the environment adversely affects their mental health. In 2022, it was revealed that Rosa, while incarcerated, attempted to hire someone to end the lives of her ex-husband Ruben and Antonia. Her plan was uncovered, preventing the crime. Rosa claimed that desperation to see her children drove her to this drastic measure. She believed that if Ruben were no longer alive, custody would revert to her parents, who she expected would not obstruct the girls' visits. As for Albert, while serving his sentence, he decided to pursue a law degree, enrolling in a Spanish university. He also dedicated himself to learning foreign languages. The case of Rosa Maria Peral Vinuela inspired a mini-series titled Body in Flames. which premiered on Spanish television in the fall of 2023. Additionally, her story became the subject of a documentary film, Rosa's Ribbons, portraying her as an innocent victim. An unequal marriage and a crime for millions. People who are madly in love with money but do not know how to earn it themselves can be extremely cunning and dangerous. They easily cross the boundaries of morality, ethics, and law. For them, there are no friends, relatives, or loved ones, and they are capable of any betrayal, even a crime, for money. Such was the case with a seemingly charming and sweet woman named Celeste. The case of Celeste and Celeste Beard in the early 2000s shocked the United States of America and was later widely covered in the media of other countries. The story began in a typical manner. An elderly millionaire decided to marry a young beauty who worked for him as a maid. Friends, relatives, and business partners advised Mr. Beard against this step, but he was blinded by love and genuinely believed that his feelings were mutual. Stephen was the fourth of 5 legal husbands of this cunning and greedy woman. She never loved him, but only saw him as a source of her own enrichment. In various ways, the wife forced the millionaire to change the conditions of their marriage contract so that, in case of his death, she would receive as much money and property as possible. To hasten her husband's demise while deflecting suspicion from herself, Celeste used a woman who was in love with her. Early years of Celeste Beard. Celeste Beard was born on August 11, 1924 in Dallas, Texas. He was the only child of a woman named Dolores, but never knew his biological father. He was always very close to his mother, who worked multiple jobs to provide everything necessary for her son. Stephen's childhood and youth coincided with the difficult times of the Great Depression and World War II. After finishing high school, the young man tried for some time to find a job in advertising, but soon realized that without education, it would be very difficult to get a good job, so he studied to become a marketer. However, he did not have time to apply his knowledge and practice, as he went to war, serving in the Navy until 1945. During the war years, Stephen gained an engineering specialty, but despite this, he could not find a decent job in peacetime. He managed to get a position as a sales consultant in a small shoe store in his hometown of Dallas, where he earned a very modest salary, barely enough for the essentials. Nevertheless, Stephen later called that period the happiest in his life, because he was young, full of strength, enthusiasm, and faith in a bright future. Most importantly, during his time working in the store, he met the main woman in his life, his wife, Alice Adams. The girl was 2 years younger than him, possessed striking looks, a slender figure, and was trying to build a career in the modeling business, but abandoned her ambitions to devote herself to her family. The young couple, deeply in love, got married in 1948, just a couple of months after meeting, and a year later, their eldest daughter was born. In 1950, Alice gave her husband a long-awaited son, and 3 years later, another boy was born. Their family was strong and loving, where everyone cared for and supported each other. From janitor to millionaire. In the early days of regular electronic television broadcasting, Stephen dreamed of working in the industry, but his path was challenging and filled with obstacles. In the late 1940s, he managed to get a job at one of the studios, but only as a janitor. However, the young man did not give up, continued searching, and soon luck smiled upon him. He was offered a chance to try his hand as a host of an entertainment program on a radio station, and he eagerly accepted the offer. After several years of hard work, Beard became the producer of a popular television program. His income rapidly increased, and he felt right at home in the field of mass communications and information. Stephen became an excellent specialist in advertising and entertainment content promotion, developing new ideas and brilliantly bringing them to life. He worked with many different people, made many useful connections, constantly improved himself, and strove to improve the world. By the mid-1950s, Stephen was successfully engaged not only in advertising and producing TV projects, but also invested the money he earned in real estate and started selling cars. By the age of 40, Stephen had earned his first $1 million and had no plans to stop there. In 1974, At the age of 50, Beard managed to win a tender together with the television company he founded. The businessman, along with his wife and 3 children, moved to Austin, the capital of Texas, where they bought a luxurious mansion with a large pool. Their home was located in one of the most prestigious areas of the city, covering almost 5,000 square meters. The couple joined an elite local club, membership in which cost them over $50,000 a year, but by that time, such an amount was insignificant for them. The Beards achieved incredible heights, raised 3 children, gave them an excellent education, and now simply enjoyed life. Alice continued to take great care of her appearance, exercised, and despite her age and having 3 children, maintained a slender figure. Meanwhile, Stephen rapidly gained weight and refused to do anything about it. He joked that his physique matched his social status and income level. All his wife's attempts to get him to exercise and watch his diet were met with promises to consider her advice. By the early 1990s, Beard's fortune had exceeded $10 million. The businessman and his family had virtually everything money could buy. The couple acquired their own yacht, traveled extensively, doted on their grandchildren, and were incredibly happy. It seemed that this happiness would last forever, but suddenly, tragedy struck their home. Illness and death of Alice Beard. In early 1993, Alice sought medical help due to severe migraines that had been constantly tormenting her. A thorough examination revealed a cancerous tumor in her brain. Treatment began immediately. One of the best neurosurgeons operated on Mrs. Beard, and she was prescribed expensive medications that were hard to obtain. Her husband spared no expense on innovative therapy, which offered some hope for recovery. Alice's diagnosis was a shock to the entire family, but they supported her and believed in the best. It seemed that their love, care, and advanced treatment technologies yielded results, and after 6 months, she went into remission. In August of that year, they went on a cruise to relax, celebrate their 45th wedding anniversary, and the victory over the illness. It was a wonderful, romantic, but unfortunately, their last vacation together. By late September, the insidious disease returned with renewed vigor and began to progress rapidly. Neither the best specialists nor experimental therapy could help Alice. She passed away on October 13, 1993, at the age of 68. For her family, it was an irreparable loss and a pain that nothing could alleviate. Period of depression and new love. After the passing of his beloved wife, Stephen fell into a deep depression. He lost interest in his business affairs, spent a lot of time at the bar of the upscale country club, sitting alone, drinking heavily, and just passing time to avoid returning to his empty, enormous house. By then, his children had long grown up and moved away, and his grandchildren only visited during holidays, leaving the millionaire in the mansion surrounded only by his numerous housekeepers, cooks, gardeners, and other staff. The man was visibly withering away. As a family man, he desperately needed a kindred spirit, care, and companionship. His relatives and friends were convinced that he needed a woman who would support him and be a source of comfort during such a difficult time. However, Stephen was not ready for a new relationship. At that moment, he couldn't even imagine loving someone else again. In early 1994, Beard met an attractive young woman named Celeste Martinez, who had started working as a waitress at the country club's restaurant a couple of weeks before their first meeting. She was a pretty, smiling blonde, very sociable, and able to attract attention. She was divorced and was fighting her ex-husband for custody of their twin daughters. Celeste was experiencing financial difficulties, had many debts, and told pitiful stories about her tough life. Stephen became a sympathetic listener and quickly grew fond of this girl. He genuinely felt sorry for her, wanted to help her out of her difficult situation, and offered her a job as a maid in his home, which she gladly accepted. Thus began a rather predictable romance between the elderly millionaire and the cunning beauty, who was almost 40 years younger than him. Who is Celeste Beard? Celeste Mary Johnson, maiden name matching her fifth husband's surname, has carried several surnames over time. Bratcher, Wolf, Martinez, Johnson, but became globally notorious under the surname of her fourth husband, Stephen Beard. She was born on February 13, 1963, in Culver City, California. Nothing is known about her biological parents, as her mother abandoned her immediately after she was born. At 2 days old, she was adopted by Nancy and Edwin Johnson. The couple had spent many years unsuccessfully trying to have their own children, but Nancy had repeated miscarriages, which led to a nervous breakdown that later developed into prolonged depression and resulted in a mental disorder. In the late 1950s, the Johnsons adopted 2 boys. In 1963, they took in Celeste, and a year and a half later, they adopted another girl. Over the years, Nancy's mental condition worsened and became increasingly unstable. The couple frequently argued, and their adopted children were unwilling witnesses to these fights. Nancy sank deeper into depression, repeatedly attempted to end her life, and even wanted to harm the children. Many years later, Celeste recounted that her most frightening childhood memory was bath time when she and her sister were in the bathtub, and their mother suddenly pushed their heads underwater, holding them there for a while before letting go. Nancy claimed she was just rinsing their hair, but the sisters were convinced their mother had tried to drown them, but then reconsidered. After this incident, Nancy was admitted to a psychiatric clinic following another nervous breakdown, leaving Edwin to care for the 4 children. He tried to be a good father and take care of his charges, but in her teenage years, Celeste openly accused him of constant molestation and abuse, which she claimed began when she was only 11. However, her words were hard to trust, as this story repeatedly changed, gained different details, and later, the blonde even alleged that her older brothers also committed acts of intimate violence against her. Pathological liar. Soon, the Johnsons separated and began a court battle for custody of their adopted children. Nancy claimed her husband was an alcoholic and accused him of domestic violence. Edwin, on the other hand, argued that the children couldn't be left with their mother because she was dangerous, and due to her mental issues, could harm herself and them at any moment. Celeste didn't want to stay with either of her adoptive parents, but in court, she testified against her father, accusing him of molestation, aggression, assault, and even armed attack. According to her, when she was a child, Edwin struck her in the head with a knife, causing her to nearly bleed to death. When asked to show the scar, she initially said it was hidden by her hair, then forgot where exactly she had been hit. Eventually, she claimed the scar had disappeared with age. Celeste constantly fabricated stories about her past, portraying herself as a victim. She understood this was the easiest way to attract attention, elicit pity and sympathy from others, and get what she wanted. During her teenage years, Celeste was extremely temperamental, behaved aggressively and sometimes irrationally, leading her to be taken to a psychiatrist. She was never diagnosed, with the conclusion being that it was just a difficult adolescence compounded by an unhealthy family environment. Celeste went through several more foster families, but never settled anywhere. Thanks to her striking appearance and brazen behavior, Celeste was very popular with the opposite gender from a young age. She often skipped school, preferring to spend time with boys in bars or on the beach, and in high school she dropped out altogether. Marriage to Craig Bratcher and birth of twins. At 16, Celeste met a young man named Craig Bratcher, who was only a year and a half older than her. They quickly started living together, and less than a year later, Celeste became pregnant. In December 1980, the couple had a modest wedding, and soon after, their twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina, were born. The young parents were unprepared for family life, domestic responsibilities, and raising children. They constantly argued, and Celeste didn't want to change her lifestyle. She spent her time in bars and clubs, leaving the children with Craig. She repeatedly accused Craig of domestic violence, assault, and forcing intimacy, trying to portray herself as a victim, secure a divorce, and receive monthly payments from her ex-husband. Celeste again accused her husband of abuse when he caught her in bed with a lover and threatened to end their lives. She managed to get Craig sent to jail for several months. although no one was actually harmed during that incident. The couple divorced in the spring of 1982. Celeste filed for child support and even obtained a restraining order against her ex-husband. However, she continued to regularly leave the children with him so they wouldn't interfere with her social life. New fleeting marriages. After the divorce, Celeste wandered from one rented room to another, living off alimony and welfare, stubbornly refusing to work. She constantly took men to court, accusing them of harassment and violence, hoping to get some compensation. Celeste had no interest in her children and simply gave them to a foster family to avoid having them interfere with her lifestyle. When her ex-husband found out, he was shocked. He managed to gain custody of the children and took them in. Soon after, Celeste convinced him to try living together again. He agreed, but the reunion was short-lived. A couple of months later, Celeste again accused him of violence and took him to court. Craig even agreed to take a lie detector test, which showed he was telling the truth. After the breakup, the parents split the children. Jennifer stayed with her father, while Christina went with her mother. In 1986, Celeste married for the second time to a serviceman named Harold Wolf. But this marriage didn't last long. Despite Harold treating her and her daughter well, life with the unstable Celeste proved unbearable. She constantly argued, threatened to end her life, and even called Harold's superiors, complaining about him, nearly ruining his career. Almost immediately after the divorce, Celeste married again. Her third husband was a wealthy top manager named Jimmy Martinez. The couple bought a spacious house in Austin, but Celeste nearly bankrupted her new husband by spending his money recklessly. When he realized she had drained his accounts and put him in debt, he tried to talk to her, but she cut her wrist with scissors. After that incident, Celeste was sent for mandatory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. The therapy did her some good, and she calmed down a bit, but it didn't save her marriage to Jimmy. She also accused her third husband of domestic violence, but he managed to have all charges dropped. Immediately after that, he filed for divorce. Fraud and incredible luck. In the early 90s, Celeste faced charges of insurance fraud involving her car. She had burned the vehicle in the desert to collect a large payout, but her scam was soon uncovered. A case was opened, but Celeste got incredibly lucky. At the hearing, she encountered a sympathetic judge who sentenced her to community service and a fine equal to the insurance payout instead of prison time. Celeste needed money, so she got a job for the first time in her life. Thanks to her striking appearance and natural charm, she was hired as a waitress at an exclusive country club, where she soon met a widowed millionaire whom she quickly began to woo. Stephen felt sorry for her and invited her to his home, which was a huge stroke of luck for her. Celeste couldn't cook or do housework, so she did everything she could to make others do these tasks for her. She quickly gained the trust of the elderly man, taking advantage of his kindness and generosity. Soon the millionaire started taking his young companion out, introducing her to his friends and partners. By then, Beard's friends were already worried, seeing how cunning and greedy this woman was. However, the businessman wouldn't listen to anyone because he was simply captivated by the beauty. But Celeste was only interested in his money, and the man himself irritated her. In conversations with her daughter, she called him unflattering names, noting that he was fat, old, and disgusting, but she was willing to endure it for financial gain. Even Celeste's ex-husbands, upon learning what was happening, tried to warn the man about who he was involved with, but he didn't believe them. Beard proposed to her, and she naturally accepted right away. However, the businessman's close friends managed to convince him to at least draw up a prenuptial agreement to retain ownership of his property and control his wife's spending. Family life and extravagant spending. On February 18, 1995, the couple officially legalized their relationship. As a wedding gift, Celeste received $500,000, had access to her husband's accounts, and was set to inherit $1 million upon his death. After the wedding, her daughter Christina moved into Beard's luxurious home, and a year later, after their father ended his life, Jennifer also moved in with her mother and stepfather. Celeste treated her husband with contempt, trying her best to undermine his health and hasten his demise. She made it a tradition to drink strong alcohol at dinner, adding sleeping pills to Stephen's drinks and food so he would fall asleep, allowing her to go out to entertainment venues. Meanwhile, she constantly thought about how to change the prenuptial agreement to maximize her inheritance after Beard's death. She convinced her husband to sell their house and buy another, arguing that she felt uncomfortable living where Stephen had spent many years with Alice. In reality, the scheming blonde wanted property acquired during the marriage. But this wasn't enough, and she began spending money from her millionaire husband's accounts. In the first month of their married life, Celeste spent over $100,000 on entertainment, shopping, and other personal needs. Her husband was bewildered, as no matter how much money he gave her, it was never enough. Moreover, Celeste stole and pawned jewelry that had belonged to the late Alice. When Stephen found out, he was so furious that he wanted not only to divorce her, but also to send her to jail. However, Celeste begged for forgiveness, telling him about her debts and the need to pay a fine for the insurance fraud case. The man believed her, helped pay off her debts, and decided to keep the marriage. Attempted murder. On October 2nd, 1999, around 3 in the morning, a frightened man called emergency services, unable to explain what was happening. He said he woke up from a sharp burning pain in his abdomen, saw that his clothes and bed were covered in blood, and his internal organs were literally spilling out, which he was holding in with his hand. The man also said his wife was somewhere in the house, but he couldn't call out to her and was just bleeding out in his bedroom. The caller was Stephen, who truly had no idea what had happened to him, but understood that without immediate help, he would die. Fortunately, within minutes, paramedics and police arrived at the mansion and saw a horrifying scene. An elderly man sat in a chair covered in blood, holding the phone in one hand and trying to stem the blood flow from his abdomen with the other. They asked him if he had recently undergone surgery and if his stitches might have come apart, to which he responded negatively. Soon, Celeste and Christina appeared, seemingly unaware of what was happening, but they remained calm upon learning about the incident. They confirmed that Stephen had not undergone any surgeries, and he was taken to the hospital. This is where things got interesting, as it turned out that the businessman had been shot in the stomach while he slept. In his bedroom, police found a shotgun shell on the floor and sealed the room as a crime scene, declaring it an attempted murder. The first suspect was Mrs. Beard, but she claimed she was in another wing of the mansion at the time, and her daughters corroborated her story. Soon it was revealed that during her second stay in a psychiatric hospital, Celeste had met a woman named Tracy Tarleton, who was also a patient. They quickly developed a close relationship, and Celeste hinted that she would leave her husband if it weren't for him being a tyrant. Tracy took these words as a call to action and decided to remove the obstacle. Investigation, trial, and sentences. Tarleton didn't even try to hide. The shotgun she used was found in her home. Celeste vehemently denied her involvement, claiming that this woman was obsessed with her and acted alone. The accused chose to remain silent. Stephen survived, gradually recovered, and was soon discharged home. However, on January 22, 2000, he suddenly passed away due to a blood clot that had formed after the gunshot wound. Now, Tracy was no longer charged with attempted murder, but with the crime itself. Yet she remained silent until July of that same year, when the newly wealthy widow Celeste married Cole Johnson. Almost immediately after Celeste's fifth marriage, Tracy began testifying against her. She admitted her guilt in Stephen's death, but noted that she was driven to such a desperate act by her lover, who had promised they could be together after the man's demise. However, after eliminating her old husband with someone else's hands and inheriting his fortune, Celeste quickly married another man. Celeste denied all accusations against her, but everyone testified against her in court, even her own daughters, who confirmed that their mother never loved her fourth husband and wished him dead to inherit his wealth sooner. Tracy made a deal with the prosecution and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She was released in August 2011. In the spring of 2003, Celeste Johnson was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole no earlier than 40 years. It was revealed that she also planned to get rid of Tarleton and was seeking a criminal to silence her lover and avoid punishment. No matter what the past experience was, new relationships are a clean slate. They offer fresh emotions and stir excitement. One has every chance to succeed where they might have failed in a previous union. However, emerging infatuation not only carries romance but sometimes also big problems. When choosing a life partner, you surely do not know what baggage they carry behind them. It happens that along with newfound feelings, you inadvertently take on burdens that should have been avoided. An example of this can be the so-called love triangle, known for its sharply defined angles. Horrific discovery. On October 5th, 2017, on the waterfront of the suburb of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA, law enforcement officers discovered the body of a man. The found body was wrapped in a tarpaulin, strapped with belts on both sides. This grim discovery was located at the bottom of a trash container of a local supermarket. During the autopsy, it was determined that the victim had received multiple blunt force hits and knife wounds. Apparently, the man had been beaten over a long period. During the assault, the unfortunate man had his jaw broken and teeth knocked out, some of which ended up in his respiratory tract. Most of the bones in the face and head were broken. Only on the skull were 6 wounds inflicted by a blunt object noted. Additionally, 6 knife wounds were found on the neck, 7 in the throat area, and several more in the upper part of the chest. The injuries were so severe that in some places the flesh was cut through. Ultimately, the medical examiners concluded that death was due to head trauma, blood loss, and suffocation. The identity of the deceased was beyond doubt, further confirmed by the victim's brother. On the pathologist's table lay 39-year-old Nicholas Wilcox from Putnam, Connecticut. What events led this young man to such a tragic end, and whether his tormentors were punished, we will learn in today's criminal story. Introduction to the main characters. In the subsequent investigation of Nick's demise, several individuals were suspected: his girlfriend Isabella Tagliarini and her former boyfriend Eric Robinson. Both were also his neighbors in the duplex where our story's protagonist had moved. The house is designed for 2 families and features separate rooms, each with its own yard and entrance, a popular type of property in Florida. Initially, Robinson, who had first rented the place, sublet the vacant units. 38-year-old Isabella was the first person he invited over. She was from Brazil, where she worked as a flight attendant for a national airline. In 2010, Tagliarini divorced and immigrated to the U.S. with her children. She successfully married an American, which helped her secure the coveted green card. The marriage lasted until 2016, but over time, their passionate feelings faded, leading to their separation. That same year, the young woman began dating 46-year-old Eric Robinson. Her new partner was from a small town in Massachusetts, had never been married, and had no children. A romantic relationship quickly developed between them, though it was periodically turbulent. The passionate nature of Isabella and Eric's accustomed bachelor lifestyle contributed to this. Moreover, according to the woman, he was inconsistent in showing his feelings. He could be cheerful and friendly, then suddenly become gloomy and aggressive. For this reason, the couple broke up and got back together multiple times. In June 2017, shortly before Nicholas moved in, the lovers had separated again. Wilcox had known the couple for about 6 months and maintained contact with them. When he mentioned wanting to save on rent, Robinson offered him to move in and share the expenses. Initially, the neighbors had a wonderful relationship. They respected each other's personal space, yet often spent time together. However, over time, this neighborly idyll was disrupted and problems began. As it turned out, Robinson was using and storing banned substances, which explained his erratic behavior and mood swings. On August 23, 2017, the man was detained. Shortly before this, he had reconciled with Isabella and was actually in a relationship with her at the time of his arrest. By then, Nicholas had already been living with them under the same roof. After Eric's detention, None of the tenants knew when the main renter would return, nor what their future held. It was possible they could be evicted at any time. Therefore, they immersed themselves in work to have a financial safety net in case of emergency. Fortunately for Nick, there was plenty of work, which was not the case for Isabella. The woman struggled to find suitable employment, so she began helping her neighbor in the construction business. The life story of Nicholas. It's worth noting that several generations of the Wilcox family engaged in similar activities. Nicholas's grandfather was a fisherman and built boats, and his father also dedicated his life to construction. Later, the main character joined the family business, becoming a roofer after graduating from school in 1996. Along with his older brother Donald, they acted as contractors, building their own client base. At the age of 23, Nick started a family. The young man tied his life to a girl named Kathy, who was his classmate in his senior year. A year later, the couple had a daughter, and 3 years after that, twins. Throughout this time, the family head worked diligently, striving to provide a decent living for his loved ones. Friends and acquaintances of Nick recalled that despite his busy schedule, he was a devoted husband and father. Yet he devoted a lot of time to his professional pursuits. Perhaps this was the reason for the family's eventual dissolution. The divorce occurred shortly after the birth of the younger children. Nonetheless, the father continued to communicate and support his family. A fresh start. At the beginning of 2017, following his brother, Nicholas moved to Florida. The new place promised better job opportunities. Here, the number of clients significantly increased. Additionally, the chosen method of earning became non-seasonal. Almost all year round, the state enjoyed good weather, warm and sunny, which creates excellent conditions not only for living, but also for business development. Moreover, the Wilcox profession came in handy in the new location, where powerful hurricanes regularly swept through the coastal areas. During storm season, homes were damaged and thus needed to be reinforced and repaired after the bad weather. Leaving his family back in Connecticut, Nicholas continued to care for his children from a distance. According to an agreement with his ex-wife, he sent them money and visited whenever possible. Initially, the man stayed in a multi-apartment complex in Fort Lauderdale. However, he later had to move to the suburbs to reduce his housing expenses. Irma. It was during this time that life brought him together with Isabella Tagliarini. The hurricane season had started, so Nick was inundated with daily orders. At that time, Hurricane Irma was approaching the area where the hero lived and worked. It turned into a powerful Atlantic tropical cyclone of Category 5, with wind speeds of about 177 miles per hour. An emergency was declared before its arrival. About 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. Nicholas spent all his time preparing buildings for the impending assault of the elements. He reinforced homes, boarded up windows and doors, and afterward was involved in clearing the resulting debris. Of course, all this was his main job, so he was paid for it, but he could not be called mercenary. In an interview, the man's older brother confessed that Nick never refused to help. One September day in 2017, as all of Florida was preparing for the terrible cyclone, Nicholas was busy boarding up windows with plywood. Soon there was a sharp shortage in stores, creating long lines. In one of these lines, a woman named Pamela approached Nick. She told him that she lacked building materials to fortify her home. In response, the younger Wilcox promised to solve this problem, and that same evening brought her the 7 missing sheets of plywood. He boarded up all the doors and windows of the woman's house and refused payment, even though he spent an entire day finding the necessary supplies. Nick was moved by Pamela's difficult life situation. She was left alone with children and needed outside help. In response, the woman thanked her rescuer. Heated romance. The hurricane brought widespread destruction, providing Nick with work for a long time. As a result, he decided to make his duplex neighbor his assistant. Isabella's duties included cleaning up after the projects were completed and handing tools during the work. As the young people spent a lot of time together, Their friendly relations evolved into a romantic relationship. On September 3rd, the couple made a peculiar vow, written in blood and on paper, which served as a sort of engagement and a promise for a long and happy life filled with lots of children. Despite the strong feelings that enveloped the lovers, their union could not be called perfect. Almost immediately, minor issues and disagreements began. Arguments arose out of nowhere. On September 22nd, a serious conflict occurred between Nicholas and Isabella. The woman even left home and spent the night in a hotel. However, the next morning, the couple reconciled. According to Tagliarini, she lacked attention and respect from the man. He, on the other hand, thought she was exaggerating. Ultimately, their love led to inevitable consequences. The message. On October 5th, 2017, a man called the local police. During the conversation, he introduced himself as Isabella's former husband and asked the law enforcement officers to contact her. According to his words, she had information about a recent crime. The caller did not provide any more details. Despite the strangeness of the call, the police immediately responded to the message and called Tagliarini. From her voice, it was clear that the woman was hysterical. When asked by the police what had happened, she replied that everything was fine. The only thing that concerned her at that moment was a fight with her beloved man. She explained that he had left her and driven off in an unknown direction. However, when the police mentioned the call from her former husband, she immediately changed her tone. The woman began to cry and confessed that her beloved had not gone anywhere, but was dead. She also added that she knew where the body was located and was ready to show it. Crime scene. Law enforcement arrived at the address provided by Isabella. The officers were met with a house, all of whose windows and doors were boarded up with plywood, apparently in preparation for the approaching hurricane. Inside, there was a strong smell of cleaning agents and paint, indicating that the place had been thoroughly cleaned. In one of the bedrooms, detectives noticed the walls and floor had been hastily and sloppily painted, likely in an attempt to cover something up rather than for a routine renovation. Their suspicions were confirmed by the discovery of hydrogen peroxide containers. Small blood stains were found on the bedding and the bedside table. It was also evident that someone had replaced the old mattress. Despite efforts to eliminate and paint over them, bloodstains were everywhere. The police suspected that the room had been the site of a violent crime, which Tagliarini had tried to clean up but hadn't completed in time, thanks to her ex-husband's timely call. Isabella was found inside the duplex, appearing distressed. During the conversation, she explained her state by saying she had been under the influence of a sedative during the phone call, which accounted for her unusual behavior. However, she confirmed knowing what had happened there and where the body was located. The unstable woman was decided to be taken to the station. By this time, the police had spoken again with her ex, who provided a partial account of the events. According to him, she had called him and told him about the crime. Initial version. Nevertheless, during the interrogation, the Brazilian woman claimed that Eric Robinson, her former boyfriend, was involved in the crime. On October 5th, around 2 a.m., the man came to the duplex and found the couple asleep. He was enraged by a vow hanging above the bed's headboard in the bedroom. He woke Isabella by putting a knife to her throat to prevent her from screaming. At that moment, she looked at Nick lying beside her, who seemed to be struggling to breathe. However, Eric did not allow her to see more and pushed her out of the bedroom. He then took a brass knuckle and a bat and began to beat the defenseless man. After finishing the beating, Robinson wrapped the body in a tarp and secured it with straps. Under the threat of a similar fate, his girlfriend helped him dispose of the body. However, the detectives were puzzled as to why, instead of calling the police, she had called her ex-husband. Isabella explained that she was very frightened and was looking for support and advice. According to her, the criminal also forced her to clean up the residence and eliminate all traces. Afterwards, he returned the phone he had taken earlier and left. Her confession raised doubts and required verification. Additionally, visible bruises and abrasions were noted on Tagliarini's body, which she explained were from being beaten by Eric after Nicholas's death. Investigation. The officers began their investigation by searching for the victim and his assailant. The suspect indicated where her boyfriend was hidden. While the medical examiners worked on the body, forensic specialists arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, law enforcement was busy searching for Eric. It was established that the man had been released from prison on October 3rd and was living at a different address. During this time, the criminal had met a new woman named Merida, at whose place he was staying. She told the police that on the night of October 5th, her boyfriend received a phone call after which he immediately left. He returned around 5 a.m., packed his things, and set off again without any explanation. When asked if she noticed any bloodstains on her boyfriend's clothes, Merida explained that she hadn't seen anything suspicious. Robinson was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles away from the house. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, and therefore, he was taken into custody pending further investigation. Eric's version. During the interrogation, Eric provided a story that differed from Isabella's version. According to his statement, Tagliarini contacted him on the night of October 5th, despite a restraining order she had received against him immediately after he was sent to prison. Despite this, she told him that she had attacked Nicholas under the influence of banned substances and ended his life. When Isabella came to her senses, she realized she couldn't manage the situation alone and asked for help. In return, the Brazilian woman promised Robinson that they would get back together and start over. As Eric still had strong feelings for her, he agreed to these terms. Fiery Brazilian. Detectives latched onto the man's words, wanting to interview the initial suspect once again. Given the circumstances and her behavior, it was clear that she was holding back information. Most likely, she was trying to minimize her role in the incident. Moreover, the investigation uncovered intriguing information. It turned out the woman was far from innocent and had been on the police radar multiple times. On September 22nd, when Nick and Isabella had a severe argument, it escalated beyond the confines of their room. Under the influence of Xanax and banned substances, she became enraged and destroyed some of her partner's belongings. Unfortunately, she also damaged his work vehicle. Consequently, the angered man felt compelled to contact the police. Moreover, she behaved so irrationally that he genuinely feared for his life. As known, the couple reconciled the following morning, and Nick withdrew his complaint. After this, investigators spoke with the suspect's ex-husband. He described Isabella as having an explosive personality and a fiery temperament. He also learned that during their argument, Wilcox had warned her. He threatened to contact immigration services if such incidents repeated. Nicholas informed her that he would give her a negative reference, which could impact her future significantly. For Tagliarini, the opportunity to live in the U.S. was paramount, so the fear of deportation was catastrophic. Could it be that during another argument, Isabella reacted explosively again and found herself under threat? It was quite plausible that her desire to stay in America could have motivated a subsequent crime. Not wanting to rely solely on existing statements, detectives began interviewing those close to the involved parties. An important witness turned out to be a neighbor of the young couple. Her windows overlooked the courtyard of the duplex. She stated that she saw Robinson arrive in his car on the night of the crime. He then took some tools and trash bags, and shortly thereafter, he got back in his car and left. The investigation continues. With substantial evidence gathered in the case, Tagliarini was called in for another interrogation on October 11th. At that time, the woman had not been arrested, so she came to the station voluntarily. Thanks to video surveillance footage, detectives established that on the fateful night, she personally transported Nick's body and disposed of it in a trash container. During this, the Brazilian was neither frightened nor agitated. She acted calmly and methodically, making decisions independently. That night, she indeed met with Eric Robinson, but she was relaxed and friendly. At the same time, no one took her mobile phone, and she purchased the items needed for emergency repairs herself. In response, she began to change her story, adding new details about the events. Isabella insisted that it was Eric who had threatened her with either murder or deportation along with her children. She claimed that she was forced to act as she did because of these threats. Although her statement sounded plausible, the investigators were cautious with their conclusions. Both Robinson and Tagliarini's backgrounds raised suspicions. Eric also had a turbulent past. He first caught police attention in 2001, mainly for possession and distribution of narcotics. At the same time, Isabella had every reason to fear him. In August 2016, he committed an aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was caught for strangulation, and in the same year, for possession of substances. Neighbors reported being afraid of the man and tried to avoid him due to his aggressive and erratic behavior. The next interrogation of the Brazilian woman took place on October 14th. Despite her claims of not having touched Nick, experts found traces of her DNA on the man's body, thus contradicting her statements. According to the investigation, she participated in the violent crime against her lover, at least in the disposal of the body and the elimination of evidence. However, neither suspect admitted to any wrongdoing. While Robinson was held in custody, Isabella was briefly detained before being released to await trial. Everyone was anticipating the start of the court proceedings. However, due to various complications and delays, the trial did not take place until 5 years later. The significant delay was caused by the outbreak of COVID-19 and a series of bureaucratic snags. During this time, the prosecution clearly formed its strategy and tactics, while the defense thoroughly reviewed all information gathered during the investigation. Additionally, during this period, another significant piece of evidence was uncovered. The prosecution managed to recover Robinson's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime against his former friend. Over these years, Isabella made a plea deal with the prosecution, admitting guilt to a lesser charge. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she agreed to testify against Eric. Sentencing. On April 10, 2023, the trial of Eric Robinson finally took place. The prosecution argued that he was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas. Isabella's role was not presented as that of a co-conspirator, but as a witness who tampered with evidence and helped eliminate traces, which is also criminally punishable. Legal complexities caused several hearing cancellations, and the trial resumed after a week. Throughout the trial, Robinson was charged with premeditated murder. Despite Tagliarini providing inconsistent testimonies and contradicting herself, her attorney maintained her innocence. The prosecution focused on witness statements that described Eric's unusual actions on the night of the crime. To avoid GPS tracking, the accused used his new girlfriend's car, which was not equipped with satellite tracking, and he also left his mobile phone at home. Meanwhile, other case details were not concealed. It became known that after the crime, Isabella and Eric had an intimate encounter in the next room. She explained her condition by stating she was under the influence of strong sedatives and also feared for her life. After hearing both sides, it became clear that jealousy was the motive for the brutal and senseless murder of Wilcox. While Isabella claimed that she had ended the relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. Upon his release, the accused returned home, but the changes that had occurred in the meantime fueled his rage and hatred. During this period, he plotted revenge against his rival and committed a cold-blooded attack while the couple was most vulnerable in their sleep. His first strike effectively sealed the fate of his former friend. He then attempted to dispose of the evidence by scattering it in various locations. The murder weapon was found in a landfill. The deceased man's body was wrapped in tarpaulin and hidden in a trash container. Afterwards, Isabella painted over blood-splattered walls and cleaned the area. Throughout these actions, Eric communicated with Isabella and directed her actions. Eventually, 51-year-old Robinson was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for second-degree murder. Isabella Tagliarini was found guilty of aiding the criminal, but threats and coercion were considered mitigating circumstances. She received a suspended sentence and is on probation until 2026. Remarkably, the convicted woman was indeed ready to do anything for U.S. citizenship. It was revealed that 10 days after Robinson was incarcerated, the parties signed another pledge. In it, Eric promised to marry Isabella, but he did not manage to do so. She was prepared to marry him shortly after he dealt with her lover. It appears that this unprincipled woman is indifferent about whom she marries. The main thing is to maintain her status. All men Isabella Tagliarini has been involved with were used for her selfish purposes and, in one way or another, were inclined toward marriage. Apparently, for her, nothing is more important than American citizenship, even if it comes at any price. To summarize this story, one might say, opportunity in life isn't singular, but life itself is. Unfortunately, some characters in this tale never realized this, while others did but much too late. Wake up. Is anyone alive in this house? Judy cheerfully entered the home of her sister, Linda Slayton. The morning of September 4th was normal, but something seemed off. Judy often visited her nephews, and today she came to their home as usual. A cup of hot coffee and a friendly conversation with her sister was how their day usually began. "Where are you, little slackers?" Judy smiled, peering into the room of her nephews, who were sleepily rubbing their eyes. She was surprised to see Linda still asleep, for she usually woke up before the boys left for school. Judy left the house and noticed that the window in her sister's room was wide open and one of the curtains was missing. It was strange. "Why aren't you in school yet? Is your mom sick? Why is she still sleeping?" Judy walked restlessly toward her sister's bedroom. "Linda Slayton, I want to see you." Judy knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The next instant, the sight that came into view made her heart sink. Her sister's body lay across the bed, her head hanging to the floor. The young woman was half undressed, and a wire hanger was wrapped around her neck. There was no sign of a struggle in the room. The closet was open, but otherwise, everything looked normal, Linda's things lying in their places. Upon seeing her sister's body, Judy screamed, and the janitor working outside called the police. The police arrived and asked the children to leave the house, which had now become a crime scene. Jeff was able to walk past his mother's room without looking at her body. Tim, on the other hand, looked into the room and saw his mother dead. The boys were sent to their grandparents' house for the duration of the investigation. That fateful morning was the beginning of a mysterious and dark story. It changed their lives forever. Linda Slayton was born on a spring day, March 8, 1950. The girl dreamed of a large and happy family. Her fate, however, did not turn out the way she wanted. At the age of 19, Linda entered into marriage with Frank Slayton. At this age, she was already a mother. 3 years before the wedding, the couple had their first son, Jeffrey, and after another year, a younger son, Timothy, was born. And only after another year, Linda managed to convince the father of their children, Frank, to become a family. But, alas, this marriage turned out to be far from her expectations. Frank, after becoming a husband and father, disappointed his family. He turned out to be a cruel man. His outbursts of anger regularly fell on his wife and sons. Jeff and Tim's memories of their childhood were filled with nightmares. Their father was an aggressive alcoholic who kept his family in suspense. Linda often thought about divorce, but fear and addiction prevented her from taking that step. However, in 1974, after 9 long years of marriage, she gathered the last vestiges of strength and determination. Leaving behind the hell that was their family, Linda took her sons and left Frank Slayton. It was the first step towards a new life where Linda hoped she could give her sons the security and happiness they had been denied for so long. She didn't yet know the trials that lay ahead, including that terrible day that became fateful for her family. After the divorce, Linda and her 2 children lived at 303 North Brunel Parkway in Lakeland, Florida, which was one of Polk County's densely populated cities. In 1981, it was a place where business was booming, and new residential neighborhoods were being built on every corner. These were mostly duplexes where large families settled. Lakeland, with its abundance of lawns and greenery, was very attractive to residents. One of the many duplex homes belonged to the Slayton family. Despite this, they didn't stay in it for long. It is known that Linda and her sons moved to Florida from Hartselle, Alabama, just 2 weeks before the horrific crime. What could have led to such a gruesome tragedy? Perhaps Linda brought not only her children with her, but also dark issues from her past. After her divorce, Linda Slayton began a new life as a single mom. She strived to give her children everything she could, torn between work and home responsibilities. Linda didn't have a car, so her sons either walked to school or neighbors drove them. Despite the hardships, Linda never gave up and tried to provide her children with everything they needed. In addition to school activities, the boys also participated in the soccer section. But since it was not always easy to get there without a car, Coach Joe became their savior. He regularly drove the brothers from home to the stadium and back. A week before the tragic events on September 4th, Linda was actively preparing for her mother's move. She was sure that a woman living with them would be able to help Linda cope with the daily household chores and create an atmosphere of comfort and family harmony in the house. On the evening of September 3rd, Jeff returned home from a workout. He felt an empty feeling in his stomach, but there was no food in the house, so he decided to go to his grandmother's house. When he returned around 9:30 p.m., his brother and mother were not in the house. The boy turned on the TV in an attempt to distract himself, but his anxious thoughts did not leave him. The quarrel with his mother, which had occurred the day before, did not give him peace. He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he came home and did not find his relatives, he began to feel a strange longing. Usually at this time, their house was in a state of excitement. Linda's mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, the smell of delicious food filling the house, and her younger brother Tim was merrily hanging around, sometimes running up to Jeff, hoping for a conversation. But sensing his brother's displeasure, he ran back to his mother. These moments were repeated several times until everyone was gathered around the table for dinner. Around 11:30 p.m., the noise and laughter of family members in the hallway interrupted Jeff's musings. His heart began to beat more calmly. His mother and brother came home, and Jeff finally went back to watching the movie that was coming to an end. At dinner, Linda talked about going to spend the evening with the neighbors and playing cards, but before that, she decided to do some housework. When his younger brother Tim went to bed, Jeff stayed and helped his mom wash the dishes. Before going to bed, he decided to stop by her room to apologize for the fight that happened between them earlier. Jeff remembers that his last words were, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." If only he had known that those words would be the last words he was able to say to his mother. September 4th, 1981 was a tragic day in the lives of two brothers, 12-year-old Tim and 15-year-old Jeff. It was then, on that terrible day, that they found their mother, Linda Slayton, dead in her bed. At the time, Linda was only 31 years old. Who could have committed such horrific cruelty against the mother of two defenseless children? Was it someone they knew, or was Linda the victim of a random attack? After Jeff and Tim left for their grandmother's house, Sergeant Edgar Pickett of the Lakeland Police Department arrived on the scene. He was the first detective to begin investigating this terrible tragedy. As soon as he arrived, police officers, reporters, and ambulances streamed to the house. The place was cordoned off. Yellow tape reading, "Crime scene, no trespassing," was stretched around the house. Sergeant Pickett was the first to uncover the most important piece of evidence in the case. On a window where the curtain was missing, he discovered a palm print that did not belong to the murdered Linda. This footprint could have been an important DNA sample, but at the time DNA testing was not yet widespread. To find out the exact cause of Linda's death, her body was sent for an autopsy. It revealed bruises on her shoulders, arms, and neck. The fact that she was half naked indicated a possible rape. After a detailed autopsy, it became clear that Linda had first been severely beaten, then abused, and then strangled with a hanger from her own closet. This horrific scenario became the starting point of the investigation, but there were still many questions. To solve the mystery of Linda Slayton's murder, the police decided to go through the genealogical tree of the Slayton family. The first suspect turned out to be Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Information about him indicated that he was a violent and aggressive man who often abused his wife and children and showed no concern for the family. Quite expectedly, Frank immediately came under the suspicion of the police. He was detained for questioning, but it soon became clear that he was in Alabama on the night of the murder. Nevertheless, the police did not rule him out as a suspect. The second suspect was Linda's eldest son, Jeff. On the day before the murder, he and his mother had a serious argument. According to witnesses, the relationship between Linda and her son had been strained recently. Jeff, as the eldest child in the family, had experienced the full brunt of living with an abusive father and then with his mother, who was raising his brothers alone. Their frequent conflicts were in plain sight, but Jeff always tried to smooth over quarrels and make peace with his mother, just as he did the night before Linda's murder. The police conducted 2 polygraph tests for Jeff, and both times the results were negative, thus eliminating him from the list of suspects. Third on the suspect list was Linda's boyfriend, whose name has not been released. This white man was a close friend of Linda's and often socialized with her children, but polygraph testing revealed nothing suspicious, and police were forced to clear him of suspicion. After Linda's funeral, the family gradually began to get the brothers' lives back to normal. The boys went back to school and tried to suppress in their minds the horrible event that had occurred at 303 North Brunel Parkway. Tim continued to attend soccer practice, and he always felt support from his team and coaches. Coach Joe stayed true to his promise and continued to give Tim rides home after practice. A month after the tragedy, Tim put a picture of the team and coach by his bed. Weeks turned to weeks, months turned to years, but the case of Linda's murder remained unsolved. The Slayton brothers had to accept the hard reality of their new life. Their mother had been murdered, and only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, were left with them to support them through this difficult time. It had been a full 17 years since the horrific murder of Linda Slayton. The years have passed, and the boys who lost their mother have grown into grown men full of love and care for their own families. Both brothers started families, and Jeff had 2 children. However, he never forgot that last night. "I didn't hear anything at all. Even the neighbors claim they didn't hear anything suspicious that night. It weighs heavily on me," he often repeated in conversation with his loved ones. Sometimes, sitting in front of the television waiting for dinner, while his wife fussed in the kitchen and his children ran around him, Jeff would catch a glimpse of the past. At such moments, he was taken back to his childhood home, to the last evening with his mother. The unsettling feelings that had gripped him that last evening seemed to foretell a horror that would change his life forever. The voices of his children and wife, each time as a rescue, brought Jeff back to reality. Despite the successful lives the brothers have built, they have never stopped following the investigation and have worked hard to keep the case alive. They regularly return to Lakeland to see if there was any news in their mother's case. In an interview, Tim said, "No matter how many investigators are replaced, we always remind them that we are waiting to find whoever killed our mom. The burden is on us, and I can't let it go." In 2001, detectives finally had a new thread that could lead to the solution of this long-standing mystery. In the same neighborhood where Linda was murdered, police arrested a man named Jimmy Ulmer, who had similar mannerisms to Linda's killer. He was charged with the attempted murder of a little girl he had tried to pull through the window of her room. The police began to scrutinize his connections and alibis and discovered that he was now already sentenced to 80 years in prison for other crimes. For the police, he became the prime suspect. However, a small problem arose. By that time, Jimmy had already passed away, and it was impossible to conduct DNA testing. However, Jimmy's mother agreed to provide a sample of her DNA. Unfortunately, the results did not match the sample found at Linda's murder scene. The investigation again went unanswered. In 1998, the investigator who had been looking into Linda Slayton's murder, Edgar Pickett, resigned and was replaced by a new detective, Brad Grace. Grace discovered an unidentified DNA sample that had been collected at the crime scene back in 1981. He decided to send that sample to the state's largest laboratory, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to try to identify Linda's killer from the DNA. By 1999, the department already had the means to conduct such tests, and Detective Grace sprang into action. He reviewed the list of suspects and decided to collect DNA samples from each of them. In 2001, he was confident that he could find the perpetrator through his DNA. He first contacted the Slayton brothers and asked them to submit DNA samples for comparison with samples found at the crime scene. The results of the analysis completely ruled the brothers out as suspects. Detective Grace then contacted Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Frank, after Linda's death, had reevaluated his life and was living a good life. Frank voluntarily gave up his DNA samples. Again, no matches were found. In 2005, Grace submitted DNA samples from the unknown perpetrator to the FBI to be tested against the data in the federal database. These comparisons were made regularly, but were inconclusive. Eventually, 17 years after Linda Slayton's murder, Detective Grace retired and was replaced by Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. After 3 more years of investigation, Tammy Hathcock learned of a new DNA recognition technology developed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. She sent a DNA sample from the crime scene to expert Cecile Moore. Using a genealogical database and other documents, Cecile Moore compiled a family tree that led to the person suspected of killing Linda Slayton. This moment proved to be a turning point in the investigation and a shocking one for the Slayton brothers. The face of the killer was in one of the photographs in Tim's bedroom. That man turned out to be Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joe. Police began investigating Mills' background and found that he had been charged with grand larceny and forging a will, but was not convicted of it. His fingerprints and palm prints were kept in police databases. To establish Joseph Mills's guilt, police had to match his DNA to that found at the scene of Linda Slayton's murder. Detectives decided to obtain a sample of Mills's DNA without his knowledge. The veracity of this information is unknown, but this is the version that is included in the case. Police collected trash from a dumpster at Mills's house and found a Band-Aid with traces of blood on it. This patch was sent for examination. At this time, detectives were investigating the suspect's background. Joseph Mills had spent most of his life in the town of Kettleman, which is only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had a family, children, and grandchildren. 2 weeks later, the lab's response came back. The DNA from Linda Slayton's murder scene matched Joseph Mills' DNA. This result became a key piece of evidence in the case, and Joseph Mills was arrested and charged with the murder of Linda Slayton. In December 2019, Joseph Mills was arrested and taken to police for questioning. He was only 20 years old at the time of Linda Slayton's murder in 1981. Detectives conducted an interview with Mills at the time, but it was done over the phone, and he did not become a suspect in the murder. Now, after years of investigation, it was impossible for Mills to deny his involvement in the crime. According to his testimony, on the night of the murder, he had come to Linda's home with her consent for sexual relations. But detectives doubted his version. They speculated that Mills had been watching Linda for some time because he regularly drove her children to practice. According to investigators' version, after the coach brought the boy home from practice, he waited until the house was empty before sneaking into Linda's room through a window. Hiding in a closet, he waited until she was alone in the room. He then came out of hiding, beat and abused Linda, and strangled her with a wire hanger from her own closet. At trial, Joseph Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The investigation and trial finally brought long-awaited justice to this horrific crime that had gone unsolved for years. The sons of the murdered woman were still left in shock and could not understand what motivated Joseph to kill their mother. The court hearing was tense. Linda Slayton's children, Tim and Jeff, sat on a spectator bench defending the memory of their mother. At the center of attention was Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe. This man who once seemed like a role model sat in an accusatory cage. His gaze was cold and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. Tim Slayton, the oldest of the brothers, looked at the man he had once revered and now saw in him the face of evil. The fire of indignation burned in Tim's eyes, and he jumped to his feet, turning to Joseph. "Why? I just want to understand why, Joe. Why did you kill our mom? Why did you take her away from us? We were so happy." Mills only mumbled back, "I'm a good man." The Slayton family never received an apology or remorse from him. Probably even the killer himself had a hard time explaining his actions. This came as a shock to Tim, because as a child he had considered Coach Joe a role model. Now he is left with only questions and painful memories. Joseph Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As if a heavy stone had fallen from the Slayton brothers' shoulders, their mother was finally avenged. And while the brothers console themselves with the thought that the killer will spend the rest of his days in prison, they are still furious at the fact that Joseph Mills enjoyed freedom for nearly 40 years while they lost their mother. Linda Slayton's story, her tragic death, and years of investigation have left an incredible mark on her sons. Tim and Jeff Slayton, two brothers who not only witnessed this tragedy, but also became first-hand participants in the investigation, share their experiences and feelings. "He kept asking us how the case was going," says Tim, the older of the brothers. "He didn't ask specific questions. He just wanted to know if there was any news on the case, if there was any new evidence, and I just told him that nothing had changed." Tim still can't believe that his mother's killer was a man he considered a friend and respected. The picture of him standing behind Joseph Mills has always reminded him that life goes on, but without his mom. Jeff, the younger brother, always thinks about how his life would have turned out if Mom had been alive. This tragedy has left an unbearable void in his heart that nothing can fill. Despite all the hardship and suffering, the Slayton brothers try to live a full life for their mother, Linda Slayton. They visit her grave regularly, placing fresh flowers and praying that she knows they will never forget her and will continue to fight for justice. Linda Slayton's story is one of fortitude, of incredible endurance, and of the fact that even after the most horrific losses, the love and memory of loved ones lives on in the hearts of those left behind. Harmful obsession. On May 2, 2009, in Wausau, Wisconsin, USA, a terrible crime took place. An 18-year-old girl named Brianna Marie Schneller was the victim. For the small town, such an event was shocking, particularly since the girl's death was the result of actions executed with unimaginable cruelty. However, more shocking than the crime itself was the motive behind it. Brianna had a vibrant personality, loved Mexican cuisine, music, and dancing, and she was fond of roller coasters. She was very diligent and performed well academically. She was the top student at Everest High School in Washington, said Craig and Lori Schneller, her parents. She had a trip planned to Tennessee that summer. The young lady was the only one in the state of Wisconsin who had made it through the qualifying rounds of a competition held by a renowned national non-profit organization for students in professional and technical fields, where she was to present her project. Brianna aspired to pursue higher education in restaurant management and dreamed of someday starting her own business in the food service industry. Therefore, she worked part-time at the El Mezcal restaurant in Rib Mountain to earn money and gain the necessary experience and skills. Friends, colleagues, and even patrons described her as a kind and responsive person. She was just a month away from significant milestones in her life. She was about to graduate from school and marry her beloved 22-year-old Sebastian Ramirez. Initially, her parents objected to their relationship and the age difference. In their view, their daughter had matured too quickly. However, after getting to know the young man better, they trusted him. It was evident that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious intentions regarding their future together. The couple moved in together, renting an apartment on 12th Avenue in Wausau along with Sebastian's 19-year-old brother, Hugo. Outwardly, it seemed that the trio got along well and lived peacefully. Many envied their friendship. The brothers supported Brianna's interests, as they also worked at a restaurant called El Tequila Salsa in the same area. It is possible that one workday was when Sebastian and Brianna met each other. In any case, no one expected that a horrific tragedy could disrupt the plans and dreams of the two lovers. The morning of May 2nd, 2009 began as usual. Sebastian was the first to rise in the house. He didn't want to wake the girls sweetly sleeping beside him. It was a day off, and she didn't need to rush to school. While the young man was in the shower, Brianna woke up. They exchanged sweet greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to wake up Hugo, who had come home in the early morning and had clearly overdone it at a party the night before. After that, Sebastian left for work, which was only a 5-10-minute walk away. His younger brother followed soon after. The girl stayed home alone. She exchanged messages with her mother and then got on with her tasks. That day, Hugo felt restless. He had a headache from too much drinking and regretted overindulging. Struggling to focus, he decided to swap lunch breaks with a colleague, and at 1:20 p.m., he headed home to catch some sleep. When he entered the apartment, nothing seemed unusual at first. However, as he walked further, he noticed a disorder in his brother's and his girlfriend's room. For some reason, Brianna was lying on the floor. Hugo rushed to her and asked what happened, but she did not respond. He didn't immediately notice the blood. The young man moved the towel that had been covering her face and screamed. She was unrecognizably disfigured. He grabbed the phone to call the emergency services, but his hands were shaking and his mind was foggy. Nevertheless, he knew he had to act, and he ran to his neighbor's apartment, a floor below. Through tears, young Ramirez tried to explain what had happened and asked the woman to call for help. At 1:30 p.m., the emergency services received a call. Despite it being a Saturday, the day was far from peaceful. Unfortunately, incidents often occur on days when people are supposed to relax. The woman on the other end of the line reported that she was calling on behalf of a neighbor. He had asked her to summon emergency medical services for his brother's girlfriend. The unfortunate woman lay on the floor with cuts on her body and a disfigured face, showing no signs of life. Police and paramedics were dispatched to the address immediately. The parking lot of the apartment building was crowded, but one individual stood out from the crowd and approached them. It was Hugo Ramirez. He led the officers to the apartment. The young man could barely speak, so he simply pointed out the shocking scene. At the center of it all lay Brianna, her body bearing deep wounds. Stab wounds were evident on her chest, neck, and wrist. The officers asked the young man to leave the room while forensic specialists began their examination. One speculated that the victim had been lying there for some time, as the blood scattered everywhere had already started to dry. It was clear she had fought back, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the assailant had overpowered her. The crime scene was rife with evidence. The first thing the forensic team noticed was a bloody iron lying on the floor, broken with some pieces scattered nearby. It appeared that the criminal had used it to strike her face. 2 knives lay in the bathroom sink, one missing its sharp tip. Blood was found on the soap, leading investigators to speculate that the criminal had used it to wash their hands. But the bloodied shoe print left on the carpet drew more attention. Overall, the examination of the dwelling revealed several curious details. There appeared to be no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim knew the wrongdoer or that he had some way of gaining entry to the apartment. Another notable detail was the scattered bills ranging from $1 to $20, amounting to a substantial sum. Hugo explained that these were tips they had accumulated at work, so much so that they were just placed anywhere. At first glance, nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment. Everything pointed to the fact that Brianna was the target of the attack, not robbery. This was confirmed by the broken knife tip found in her body. What kind of force was necessary to break a knife? Who could harbor such feelings towards a young woman? And most importantly, what could have been the cause of such unprecedented cruelty and aggression? Eager to shed light on the matter, law enforcement officers were keen to speak with the girl's relatives and close friends, especially as they needed to convey the dreadful news. In the police department's office, Craig and Lori Schneller awaited news. They had heard that something terrible had occurred at the home where their daughter lived, but unfortunately, they had been unable to contact her. With heavy hearts, they went to the police station seeking answers. The officers had to confirm the parents' worst fears were indeed true. There was no greater sorrow for parents than to endure the loss of a child. The devastating news split the Schneller's life into before and after. Authorities provided photographs of Brianna for identification. The process was a mere formality, as her identity was already established, but protocol required it. Due to the horrific injuries, not all photographs taken at the scene were shown to the family. Only those that showed part of her face were displayed. Once confirmed, The Schnellers could hardly believe what had happened. After consulting with a psychologist, Craig and Lori were able to answer a series of questions. They were eager to assist the investigation and catch the person responsible, so they provided as much information about their daughter's life as possible. The parents insisted that she had no known enemies or ill-wishers, at least to their knowledge. It was also revealed that Brianna's mother was the last person she had communicated with. That morning, Lori had taken Brianna's car to the auto repair shop and had messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to inform her. Brianna had responded. This means that the tragic incident occurred after she spoke with her mother and before Hugo's arrival, establishing a timeline for the events. The police launched a comprehensive investigation. The first to be invited for an interview by the detectives were the Rodriguez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, who were questioned separately. The fiancé of the victim, Sebastian, reported that he woke up at 9:15 in the morning, had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke his brother. By 10:15, he was already at the restaurant. He learned about the incident after receiving a phone call. Hugo's account matched, stating he left the house about 15 minutes after Sebastian. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. because he was feeling unwell and wanted to rest. However, his illness and fatigue vanished when he discovered Brianna lifeless. After that, everything seemed like a blur. He explained that he was so stunned that he couldn't think straight on how to react properly. His mind shut down and his hands trembled, leading him to run to a neighbor and ask for help. The Ramirez brothers' statements were credible and their distress appeared genuine. However, the police had often encountered convincing performances before, so they needed solid proof of their innocence. It was entirely possible that one of them was the perpetrator and the other was covering for him. Therefore, detectives inquired about their relationships with each other. Sebastian declared his love for Brianna and his anticipation for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was asked if he had any grievances against his brother's girlfriend or if they had quarreled, to which he responded negatively. He also clarified that despite her attractiveness and charm, he had no intentions toward her because he valued their good relationship and would never interfere with Sebastian's happiness. Brianna was like a sister to him. The interrogations lasted for hours, yet neither brother aroused any suspicion. After taking DNA samples from the young men, they were allowed to return home. To confirm or refute the Ramirez brothers' alibis, detectives interviewed employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the establishment's surveillance footage. Sebastian and Hugo's accounts were corroborated. The theory of a domestic-related crime was dismissed. Then who was the murderer of this innocent young woman? Could there be a predator in the city? Perhaps he had been watching Brianna earlier and had learned much about her. Maybe on a day when she was alone, he executed his criminal intent. The investigation continued. By this point, the autopsy results had come in, confirming the initial suspicions of the police. The sequence of the crime was reconstructed as follows. Brianna first sustained a blunt force injury to the head, likely with an iron. Then the perpetrator cut her throat, followed by multiple stab wounds to her body. The ferocity and relentlessness of the attack were evidenced by the number of wounds, which were so numerous that even experts couldn't tally them. At least 2 of these injuries were immediately fatal. The young woman fought fiercely for her life, as indicated by the foreign DNA found under her nails. Later developments revealed that earlier statements claiming nothing was missing from the home were incorrect. The victim's phone had disappeared. Sebastian discovered the loss and promptly informed the detectives. This piece of information became a critical lead, as once the police received this new clue, they began searching for the mobile device. Brianna's cell phone provider reported that her phone was still active and provided its location. It turned out that the phone had been nearby all along, specifically within the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. The investigation grew more complex with the brothers' undeniable alibi, and one of them reporting the missing phone, against the backdrop of suspicious coincidences. Detectives urgently traveled to the specified location, but upon arrival, they found that the coordinates led to the parking lot of a shopping center housing the restaurant. It appeared the sought-after item was in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found inside a container. Within the bag were the girl's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves was stained with blood. This unexpected discovery shifted the narrative, as theories about a predator and a crime driven by intimate motives began to gain traction. The bag and its contents were sent to the laboratory for further examination, potentially still holding fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. When shown a photo of the contents, Sebastian recognized his girlfriend's underwear. The investigation proceeded with numerous interrogations of the restaurant staff. On May 5th, everyone was asked to provide DNA samples and undergo examinations for any scratches or injuries. Additionally, both the external and internal surveillance footage of the building and neighboring establishments was thoroughly reviewed. The police had a considerable task ahead of them to determine who had disposed of the bag. Initially, a kitchen worker attracted attention because he was notably late for work, arriving when Brianna was already lifeless. However, the young man had an alibi. He had been stopped for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Nonetheless, reviewing the surveillance footage proved invaluable to the investigation. Another individual, the 24-year-old kitchen manager Raul Poncerocha, became a person of interest. On the day of the crime, he left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned at 10:53 a.m. without it. During questioning, he was asked about his whereabouts and intentions. Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant. Interestingly, Luciano lived in the same building as Brianna, Sebastian, and Hugo. When asked how long his errand took, he said about 20 minutes, but there was a problem with the timeline. What happened in the remaining 15 minutes? Raul refused to explain. Meanwhile, Luciano confirmed Raul's story, saying they did not stop anywhere on their way to work. However, the 15-minute discrepancy continued to trouble the detectives, and Raul's behavior raised questions. He had cuts on his hands, which he attributed to working with knives. Raul was clearly suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence for his detention. By May 9th, it was established that on May 2nd, at 1:16 p.m., a single employee exited the back door of El Tequila Salsa, and at the same time, only one person approached the trash bins. Identifying the suspect took little time. When his name was announced, the investigative team was not surprised. It was not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez, as initially thought, but the suspect Raul Poncerocha. When a search warrant was obtained for his home, curious details about the manager's life emerged. Under the mattress of his bed were found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos along with a brown hoodie and a glove resembling the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag. A strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. Everything pointed to the victim, Brianna. It was just a matter of matching the test results. Raul was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. When it became known that the alleged perpetrator had been found, Sebastian couldn't believe his ears. He never thought his colleague capable of such cruelty. The main question that troubled him was, why did he do it? They hardly knew Brianna and had only seen her in passing. Raul had always seemed like a kind and cheerful guy, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. But the answer was found. The trial of Raul Poncerocha took place in 2011. Despite the lengthy investigation, Poncerocha never admitted guilt and consistently denied any involvement in the crime. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence. The defendant's DNA was found on all key pieces of evidence: the iron, the knives, the plastic bag and its contents, and under Brianna's fingernails. Additionally, a shoe print found on the carpet at the crime scene matched the size and pattern of the suspect's shoes. The investigation painted a clear picture of the events. On May 2, 2009, Raul arrived at work at 9 a.m. En route to the restaurant, he passed the victim's house, a place that had long piqued his interest. Not seeing her car, he assumed she was out and saw it as an opportune moment to enter her apartment and take what he desired. The accused had a peculiar habit of collecting women's underwear, the evidence of which was found under his mattress. After the Rodriguez brothers arrived at work, Raul left the restaurant under the guise of picking up Luciano. Instead of signaling his friend immediately upon arrival, he entered the victim's apartment. He easily unlocked the door and entered. It appears he went into Brianna's room and began rummaging through her belongings. He was likely caught off guard at that moment. Otherwise, he could have excused his unexpected presence by claiming he was looking for one of the brothers and that the door had been open. Realizing the absurdity of the situation and fearing recognition, he struck her with the first object he could find, an iron. He then slashed her throat with a knife, followed by inflicting multiple injuries. The investigation concluded that the process of taking her life seemed to gratify him, as evidenced by the excessive number of wounds inflicted on the poor victim. It also noted that Raul used multiple knives during the attack. Afterwards, the culprit tried to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, as he still had to meet Luciano and drive him to the restaurant. He then resumed work as if nothing had happened, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. When many staff took their lunch breaks, he seized the moment to dispose of the bag containing the evidence in a trash bin. Shortly before the trial, Raul stated that he indeed met with Brianna, but did not end her life. However, he suspected who might have done it and named a former restaurant employee. According to the defendant, he saw this acquaintance at Brianna's house on the day her life was tragically ended, thus confirming that he indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when he left, Sergio stayed with Brianna, apparently having an argument. The defendant's statement raised additional questions and investigations. The information he provided was subject to verification. Moreover, the individual he mentioned was abroad. Nonetheless, authorities managed to contact Sergio. He even appeared at the trial to testify his non-involvement and refute Raul's slander. The young man easily proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime. Weeks before, he had left to care for his gravely ill father in Mexico. Apparently, the defendant hoped that contact with Sergio would not be established, thereby sowing a seed of doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed. The defendant merely emphasized that he had no qualms about falsely accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime. It was clear that he felt no remorse for his actions. During the trial, Brianna's relatives, as well as Sebastian and Hugo, were present. The young men struggled to contain their emotions, prompting officers to repeatedly call for calm. Ultimately, Raul Ponce Rocha was found guilty of the crime against Brianna Schneller, as well as burglary. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at a correctional institution in Walpoon, Wisconsin. Following the verdict, the victim's father stated that his daughter's case had become personal for many involved, as they all have families and children. He shared that he has not parted with a Father's Day card Brianna gave him, cherishing every memory of her. Craig Schneller confessed that Brianna's death broke his heart, and he lost faith. No information about Sebastian Ramirez is available. It is only to be hoped that he has closed this tragic chapter of his life with a sense of completeness and has been able to move forward. One day, his brother Hugo appeared on a television show discussing the ordeal they endured. Raul's actions were fatal for Brianna. He not only ended the life of a beautiful young woman, but also devastated the hearts of her family. Things could have been different if the young man had not chosen to cover his tracks. He might have gotten away with clumsy explanations and apologies to the girl. At most, it would have ended with a confrontation between him and the Rodriguez brothers. It is unlikely the victim would have reported him to the police, and even then, the incident could have been resolved with minimal harm.
On January 12, 2023, CBS News Minnesota aired a 24-second clip of the death of gray-haired old man Donald Blome. He died on January 10, 2023, at the age of 73 from natural causes consistent with age. But who was this old man who made it into the news summary? Donald Blome is a brutal maniac and criminal who served a life sentence in prison and despite his deeds died his death. Donald Blome's death brings to an end a long-running saga of violence and depravity that began in the 1970s and saw him commit a series of heinous crimes, culminating in the brutal murder of Kathy Poirier. Despite his long history of violence, Blome managed to evade justice for years until a chance encounter led to his capture and punishment. He began his crime spree in 1975 when he kidnapped a young girl. The pervert gagged her and took advantage of her, then locked her in the trunk of his car, but the girl was not timid, and she managed to escape and later handed over to the police criminal. Blome was tried and found guilty, but the punishment was too lenient, and in 1978, when he was free, he again committed aggravated assault. In 1983, he was arrested for criminal sexual conduct. That same year, he threatened 2 young girls in a remote area with a knife, tied them to a tree and stuffed socks in their mouths. He choked and revived one of them several times and repeated that he was going to do something terrible to them. The girls were rescued when a police patrol saw their improperly parked car and responded quickly to find the owner. Blome then fled into the woods and later changed his appearance by dyeing his hair. He was arrested 2 months later. When one of the girls recognized him, he pleaded guilty to the crime, but the newly received punishment did not reform him. During an examination in 1992, the psychologist concluded that without close supervision and monitoring, Blome would resume antisocial behavior in the near future. Antisocial behaviors are actions that are harmful or disregard the mental state of others, which is exactly the state the psychologist predicted Donald would be in. However, Blome managed to change his name, get a job, and get married. By May 1999, he had 6 felony convictions on his record, 5 of which involved kidnapping and violence. But who is Donald Blome, and where does the cruelty and desire to dominate others come from in an ordinary man? Let's get to the bottom of it, because perhaps the answer lies in the man's rather troubled early years. Donald Alban Blome was born on February 5, 1949, in the state of Minnesota. He was an American by nationality. Blome had a troubled childhood as he was often abused by his father from his early age until his teenage years. By then, Donald Blome was already drinking heavily and exhibiting behavioral problems, and in 10th grade he went to a reform school where he often skipped classes. The trauma of a violent relationship with his father is likely what led him to develop behavioral and alcohol problems. This was especially evident as he entered puberty. But let's take a closer look at this story through the eyes of a mentally healthy person and ponder where the chain of events that led to the man's disappearance broke down. On May 26, 1999, Caitlin Poirier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store at a service station. After midnight, a customer of the store called the police to report that the clerk was gone. Police officers who arrived on the scene found the store was indeed empty. They checked the surveillance video and saw a large man holding Katie by the neck lead her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. He was wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 on the back. The fragile young woman was apparently forced out of the store. Catherine Honeck, an employee of the Subway restaurant that was next to the store from which the girl disappeared, was questioned by police. She said that shortly before the Subway store closed around 10 p.m., she saw a man acting strangely. After closing, Honeck drove home, and coincidentally, she encountered the man who was leaving the store on the road. She noted that the stranger was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab with white markings on the side. The pickup truck looped around the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in the parking lot of a local cafe. Honeck also reported that Kathy's car was still in the parking lot when she left work. Based on her description and partially recovered surveillance camera footage, a rough sketch of the kidnapper was made. He had long blonde hair, and appeared to be about 25 years old. A composite sketch was made from 4 witness statements and was broadcast on local television and placed in local newspapers asking for information. While clues were being gathered, hundreds of people arrived from across the state to help circle the wooded area around the station in search of the kidnapped Kathy Poirier. Police used service dogs and helicopters, but found nothing. Posters of Kathy appeared in many newspapers and on billboards throughout the region, turning her story into a high-profile missing persons case. The local sex offender facility, which was located near the store where Katie went missing, reported that all inmates were accounted for. The information provided was accurate, which completely ruled out a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police officers began searching for the vehicle by license plate number and came up with Donald Blome, but unfortunately, the truck in his driveway was white in color. On June 6, 1999, the official search ended without success, but many volunteers continued to look for the girl. They believed that at least someone somewhere had seen something that would make the right connection and bring the girl home. Whether the perpetrator was brave or foolish for daring to take the girl out of a store equipped with a security camera, investigators were looking for at least one more mistake he would make. The searchers emphasized the neighborhood itself. After all, if the perpetrator was in this fairly remote area at night and returned to the store twice, it was likely that he knew the area very well, which meant that someone must have seen the man before the crime. A search headquarters was set up at the Lutheran Church in Moose Lake, with staff members assisting in processing leads and volunteers handing out flyers describing Katie. On the wall were maps with large crosses marking the areas that searchers had already traversed. But despite the efforts and hopes of many, Katie never turned up, suggesting that the kidnapper might be an athlete or a fan of the New York Yankees team. The police sought the help of a sports figure. 2 weeks passed, but still no result. The police asked Minnesota Twins legend Paul Molitor to make a public service announcement. His appeal to Minnesotans across the state caught the attention of Darrell Brown, who worked at the Minnesota Veterans Home. On June 18th, he called the hotline to report his co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck and was described as looking like a composite sketch. He had been absent the day after the abduction and had recently gotten a haircut. Investigation revealed that Donald Hutchinson was actually Donald Blome and had a black pickup truck carefully hidden in his garage. He also owned property 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Kathy worked. During further digging, investigators learned that Blome had been convicted of sex crimes, specifically kidnapping petite young girls like Katie. Detectives worked quickly to get a search warrant. Agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension went looking for Blome and found him and his family at a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield. Agents woke him up early in the morning to ask him some questions. He was brought in for questioning. Further inspection revealed that Blome had purchased property in Moose Lake about 2 years ago. Neighbors confirmed that he had been there frequently before Katie's abduction, but had not been there since. Blome's supervisor at the veterans' home said he was unaware of the man's criminal record because he used the name Hutchinson. He said Blome always kept to himself and didn't socialize much with people. After his arrest, Donald Blome was friendly and cooperative, but then he refused to testify and asked for an attorney. Meanwhile, authorities organized a series of searches that left them in shock. Various items were seized from Blome's home, but no official statement was given as to what the items were or how they figured in the investigation. Another search was conducted on Blome's 20-acre property in Moose Lake, involving more than 100 National Guard members and several hundred volunteers. They marched several miles from his property into the woods, but as darkness fell, they had to leave. The next morning, the search resumed with renewed vigor, and Katie's mother said she had a gut feeling that they would find her daughter alive. Apparently, some hoped the girl was being held somewhere against her will, but the sheriff was less optimistic. On the morning of the second day, Searchers found bone-like fragments among the ashes in a fire pit on Donald Blom's property. They were sent to the lab for further testing, and to everyone's shock, they were identified as bone fragments, and a tooth found in the ashes was also sent to odontologists, experts in dental remains. Certified forensic dentist Dr. Ann Norlander conducted a time-consuming and expensive examination of the tooth. She knew that under the conditions under which it was extracted, any DNA that could have been extracted from the pulp of the tooth would have been destroyed, so she had to resort to other methods. When she came across something that looked like a filling, it confirmed that it was a human tooth and allowed her to determine if it could have belonged to Katie. Dental fillings are made up of an organic matrix and an inorganic filler. The organic matrix burns away, leaving behind particles of the filler. This allows the analyst to identify a brand, or at least a group of brands. Manufacturers use as many as 50 different types of fillers, any one of which will show up vividly on dental x-rays. The composition of the filling of the tooth from Blom's fire pit matched the composition of the fillings used for Katie. In addition, researchers were able to identify it as tooth 18 and determine that it belonged to a young woman. The likelihood that it had once been in Kathy's mouth and not someone else from the area was quite high. One major question remains unanswered. Why did the perpetrator get out of prison after kidnapping 7 different girls? If the justice system had worked better, Katie might still be alive. Instead, Blom was able to change his name and shake off the stain of his criminal past, get a job, get married, and become a new identity as a cover to continue causing harm. In the case of Katie Poirier, Blom was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, which is a federal charge. Given his prior convictions, Blom was not allowed to carry a firearm. He was offered a plea agreement, but he didn't want to even talk. But then he changed his mind and said he was willing to testify, with the condition that he call home. On September 8th, Blom made a tearful confession that lasted 2.5 hours. He said that on that day, May 26, 1999, he went fishing and then drove home to Richfield. Later that evening, however, he returned to his home on Moose Lake. On the way, he stopped to buy liquor and have a beer at a bar. He saw Kathy in the store while she was doing business. He did not know her, but grabbed her and forcibly put her in his pickup truck. He then drove her to his motorhome. "I don't know if it was just out of guilt or something else or because I felt stupid," he said, "but then I strangled her and killed her." He strangled her from behind, saying it took about 20 minutes. He did not admit to any other type of assault. Once he knew she was dead, Blom placed her body in a fire pit in the fetal position and then gathered wood and paper to make it burn. But Blom's account clearly contradicted the video camera footage and the discovery in the burn pit. Blom claimed that he remembered her asking him several times to let her go, although she did not struggle with him until he began choking her on his property. He said he managed to kill her with his bare hands. His account of burning the remains was also not realistic enough, as wood and paper alone could not have reached a high enough temperature to turn a human body to ashes. When prodded, he admitted that none of this made much sense to him. He just didn't know why he did it. When the interview was over, Blom called 2 local television stations to report what he had done and asked that the reporters leave his family alone. The deal also returned confiscated property to his wife, Amy Blom, including a parcel of land on Moose Lake, a home in Richfield and the family car. For the Poirier family, the confession was devastating because they had hoped Kathy was still alive. Blom now claimed that she had been murdered and cremated for no reason other than his nocturnal impulse, which he could not explain. Blom soon recanted, saying he made a false confession due to the stress of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking. He said he was hallucinating and believed the only way to escape from the cell was to tell the authorities what they wanted to hear. But he was out of his mind, he now claimed, and didn't know what he was saying. The plea bargain had been canceled, and lawyers for both sides were preparing for trial. There are different types of false confessions, and sometimes people just spontaneously confess to something they did not do. This usually happens in response to a high-profile case. Some people expect the interrogation to be too intense, so they quickly succumb to the pressure to confess. But there is another type of phenomenon that can occur. People may internalize assertions of guilt from the police and come to believe that they have committed a crime that they were not involved in. Whether Blome actually confessed to perjury or recanted his testimony is now for the jury to decide. Blome was brought to trial. The trial began in June 2000 and took 5 weeks for jury selection. The trial took another 5 weeks, during which more than 50 witnesses, including several key witnesses, were called to testify. The case was opened by Carleton County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Thomas Pertler. Among the first witnesses, Blome's brother testified that he had given the family a box of old clothes, including a New York Yankees jersey. Blome had previously said he had never owned such a shirt. Even more damaging was the testimony of 2 women whom Blome kidnapped in 1983, who agreed to testify about how he treated them. The jury learned firsthand what he was capable of. Both women, being young girls at the time, looked like Kathy. Forensic odontologists then confirmed that the partial tooth matched Kathy's age, gender, and dental records. Dr. Ann Norlander admitted that at first she was not sure it was even a tooth. At the hearing, she testified that with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, the tooth belonged to Kathy. It was the discovery of chemicals in the filling material that led her to that conclusion. A surveillance video from another store that captured Blome back in May showed that around the time of the kidnapping, his hair, now gray, had blonde tips, as his barber confirmed, making him look younger. Most revealing was Blome's confession, which the judge allowed into evidence. Each juror was given a transcript for further review. Thereafter, there was silence in the courtroom, save for the quiet sobs of Kathy's relatives. The case against Blome seemed pretty strong at that point. Rodney Broughton, lead defense attorney, called his first witness on August 7th. Amy Blum testified that her husband was home the night Katie disappeared. Speaking from the bench, she said she guessed where her husband was that day because she saw a broadcast the next day about the girl's disappearance. She called attention to it because the location of her disappearance was near the country house they owned on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Because Blome had a criminal record, she figured he would be a suspect, so she later realized exactly where he had been the night before. Blome returned home at 9:30 p.m., and they had already gone to bed. When his spouse woke up in the morning, coffee was ready, his spouse was home. She also testified that the police officers bullied her, threatening to take her children away if she didn't answer questions the way they wanted her to. "They called me a liar," she said. She also denied that she had ever seen a baseball jersey in the clothes her son-in-law gave them, and said she had never seen her husband wear one. As she spoke, Blome wept, visibly wiping his eyes. On August 10th, Blome took the stand in his own defense. Under oath, he denied that he had kidnapped Kathy Poirier. He remained on the witness stand for more than 3 hours, alternately talking and crying. He claimed that his life was falling apart, and he felt ill at the time he admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime. He added that his wife was threatening to leave his life due to media pressure, so he decided to do everything he could to free himself from the cell he was imprisoned in. He spent quite a bit of time trying to get the jury to feel sorry for him, as if he was the victim. He agreed that he had made a confession, but said he had also recanted it. He now claimed that he was not at Moose Lake the night of the crime, but rather he was sleeping at home with his wife, as she had told him. Although he had been fishing there earlier in the evening, he was home at 10 p.m., well before Katie was taken from the store. Later on cross-examination, Blome was forced to admit the lies and inconsistencies in his statements to the police at the beginning of the investigation, so appearing in court did him no good. To many, he appeared to be a whiner trying to get away with it once again. When the questioning ended, Blome looked frustrated. He turned to the judge, cursed, and asked if he could only make one statement. After a negative answer, the case went to the jury. After 10 hours of deliberation, 3 of which were spent replaying the taped confessions, the jury found Donald Blum guilty. He received a life sentence without parole. Blum continued to insist that it wasn't over and predicted that one day he would be exonerated. "I never killed anyone," he insisted. He was sure he had a strong case for appeal. But in 2004, the appeals court issued an 81-page ruling that upheld the conviction. Although his trial was not perfect, the judges decided it had been fair. They saw no reason to overturn the ruling or order a new trial. The murder of Caitlin Poirier led to the passage of Katie's Law, which included the development of a statewide computerized crime-fighting network, tightening the requirements for tracking predatory sex offenders like Blum.
Jeremy Ogden, a detective with the Hobart, Indiana Police Department, leaned over his desk, staring at a manuscript that had kept him busy for years. The diary bore witness to a tragic story involving 53-year-old Christopher Reagan. Christopher Reagan was born in Detroit, Michigan. In this city, he lived his early years, and there he received his education. When he reached the age of 20, he decided to join the ranks of those who were willing to defend their country. Christopher found his true calling and devoted himself to the service of his country. With honor and devotion, he stood guard over the peace of the citizens. This choice forever determined his fate. Christopher was sent to a military base located near the cozy town of Marquette. Here, on the military base, not far from Marquette, fate brought Christopher together with Terry, a young teacher from the cozy town of Iron River. Recalling their acquaintance, Terry told the detective how, being young, they saw each other and sympathy arose at first sight. Young people often met on the streets of the city and embarrassed to say hello, and over time, began to walk together. Communication became more and more frequent and closer, and eventually grew into friendship. For several years, they remained only close friends because the service in the Army did not leave Christopher the opportunity to build a serious relationship. At some point, Chris decided to leave the military service and move to Traverse City, a city located in the same state, but far from the place where his beloved lived. However, the distance did not become a barrier to their feelings. On the contrary, communication between them became even closer, and in December 2012, Christopher proposed to Terry to start a long-distance romantic relationship. Both were single at that moment, knew each other for many years, and always observed the line of propriety. Terry happily agreed. After a short time, the lovers realized that they had many common interests: a love of nature, a preference for a measured lifestyle, a thirst for tranquility. That's why Iron River became the perfect place for both of them. The couple made the decision to live together. Christopher moved in with Terry, found a job at a factory producing parts for military ships, and soon he had his own subordinates. Life was shaping up in the best possible way. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began in the relationship between Christopher and Terry, and the passion gradually faded. As young people did not try to overcome the difficulties of this difficult period, it became obvious that they would not be able to keep their connection. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to part ways. The parting was peaceful, and the former lovers managed to maintain friendly relations. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher could no longer continue his life in her house, so he decided to rent his own place. As time went on, it dawned on him that he wanted to change where he lived as well. Iron River seemed too small, and Chris began looking for a more dynamic and vibrant city. He responded to job openings in various locations by sending out his resume. In October 2014, fate presented Christopher with the opportunity to start a new chapter in Asheville, North Carolina. Here he found not only a job, but also a cozy place with many picturesque natural attractions. In a new city, Chris was about to start his life anew. On October 14th, Christopher wrote Terry that he had taken the day off and would be free the next day. The reason was a doctor's appointment. after which he suggested they meet up and go for a walk, as they had often done when they still lived together. However, on October 15th, he did not contact his girlfriend. Terry was worried. She tried calling him for several days. Concerned, she contacted mutual friends, but they knew nothing.
10 days later, a worried Terry filed a police report about Christopher's disappearance. The report was accepted, but the police were quick to comfort Terry, assuring her that people sometimes disappear for a while and then return, sometimes even ending up in other places. At the police station, Terry also revealed that Christopher had recently received a job offer in North Carolina. For the police, this was reason not to be too concerned, suggesting that he may have made it to his new residence and decided to start a new life, severing all ties to the past. To avoid making idle speculations, investigators launched a detailed investigation. They managed to identify the company where Christopher had recently started working and contacted one of the employees to find out what he knew about Christopher. However, astonishingly, no information could be obtained. Christopher had not shown up for work in 10 days. The police speculated that he might have been the victim of an accident, given his frequent solitary trips outdoors. Search forces headed into the local woods, trying to check everything on the paths Christopher liked to explore. Specially trained dogs were deployed to reinforce the search, but unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. Terry then suggested a visit to Christopher's former apartment in order to make sure that no accident had happened to him. Perhaps traces could be found there that would indicate his current whereabouts. Agreeing to Terry's suggestion, the investigators went to the home of the missing Christopher. Upon entering the apartment, the detectives were struck by the chaos inside. Items were strewn across the floor, closets were left open. Their first thought was that Christopher was probably just a sloppy person and had forgotten to clean up. Terry, however, immediately refuted this idea, claiming that her ex-boyfriend was not that sloppy. The detectives began to lean toward the idea that all of this might be connected to the crime. After inspecting Regan's home, it was decided to start searching for him on a larger scale. The police looked carefully through the neighborhood and finally found Regan's car outside the city limits, about 8 miles from Iron River. It was unlikely that he had left his car there intentionally. They had to break one of the doors to get inside the car. There was nothing suspicious in the interior. On the seat were ordinary clothes, such as those often found among locals: hat, coat, gloves. However, one of the policemen carefully noticed on the front passenger seat a small piece of yellow paper with a route written on it. It was decided to follow the route indicated in the note. There was no specific address on the paper, but the route was described in detail. Terry explained that despite living in Iron River, Christopher still hadn't learned the names of streets and roads, so he wrote down directions like turning at a bus stop or driving past a gas station. Terry shared that, judging from the detailed notes, this was the first time Christopher was headed to this location. The group of detectives followed the route indicated on the piece of paper. This route took them to a neighboring town. Stopping in front of the house noted in Christopher's notes, the investigators knocked on the door. They needed to find out who lived there and why Christopher had traveled that way. The door was opened by Jason Cochran, an overweight man who was surprised to see uniformed men in front of his house. His wife, Kelly, soon appeared. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating the disappearance of Christopher Regan, and a piece of paper found in his abandoned car pointed to this address. Kelly candidly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they got along well, and were even friends. She had not been in contact with him in recent weeks, but in mid-October, she tried to contact Chris via text messages. She received no response and assumed he had gone to North Carolina for a new job. Kelly also mentioned that Christopher had been having health issues and may have just decided to start a new life. Investigators found themselves in a quandary. They did not understand why the route that led to the Cochran home was written down on a piece of paper found in the missing man's car.
Despite the lack of answers, the couple expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After a brief questioning, without getting the information they needed, the detectives left their home. The next phase of the investigation was a conversation with Christopher's co-workers. The detectives went to the factory where they interviewed workers and supervisors. One of the supervisors revealed that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, and rumors had been circulating for months. This statement sparked interest, and investigators decided to re-interview the Cochran couple and clarify what was really going on in their relationship. In the end, Kelly admitted that she and Christopher did have an affair, but she was unable to disclose it the previous time because of her husband's presence. She and Jason, she said, have an open relationship, and Jason is generally okay with his wife's affairs on the side. However, the topic was sensitive and may have hurt his feelings. Christopher's co-workers, for their part, refuted Kelly's words. They stated that Jason was far from approving of the affair, and there was no loose relationship in the Cochran family, as Kelly claimed. Following Kelly into the police office was Jason himself. A conversation with him unequivocally revealed that he was adamantly opposed to his spouse's infidelity. This position made him a suspect. Nevertheless, the lack of conclusive evidence made it impossible to conclude that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance. The officers had no choice but to release Kelly and Jason from the police station. The investigation dragged on for 5 long months, and the mysterious mystery remained unsolved. On March 5, 2015, the case was placed in the hands of a new investigator who immediately began actively working on it. The first order of business, Hobart Police Department Detective Jeremy Ogden began a thorough analysis of the Cochran family's history. Kelly had met Jason while still in high school, and immediately after graduation, they began living together. The two were completely different in personality. Kelly was open, socially adept, and loved to talk. Jason was known for his reticence and taciturnity. He never started a conversation first, only answering questions asked of him. Despite these differences, the couple decided to get married. After the wedding, the couple started their own company, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it brought them a decent income. Most of the pool maintenance work was taken on by Jason. The constant stress and strain took a toll on his health. The man began to have back problems, and every day he felt heavier and heavier. One day he realized that he was unable to continue the business. That's when Kelly took over all the work of running the business. It was a difficult period, but she trusted that her husband would soon recover and return to his duties. While his condition was getting worse day by day and the medical drugs were not bringing the desired relief, Kelly looked for all ways to help her husband recover. One day, she learned about a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. There was a chance, although its use in medical practice had only recently begun. It wasn't available everywhere, especially since it was banned in the state where they lived. For Kelly and Jason, the only way to get the drug was to move. They chose Michigan and moved to Iron River Township in 2014. Here, Jason was able to consult with a doctor and get a prescription for a miracle plant. Finally, his agony was going to be over. So, in early 2014, the plant, which specializes in manufacturing parts for U.S. warships, brought a new employee, 34-year-old Kelly Cochran, who had moved with her husband Jason to the area. Kelly made every effort to ensure her family's financial well-being, and the couple took a job at the same plant where Christopher Regan worked.
Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This companionship was of particular importance to Christopher, who had recently been having difficulties in his relationship with Terry. After reviewing all the evidence, the prosecutor made a strong case to a judge in Michigan to obtain a search warrant for the Cochrans' home. After successfully obtaining a ruling, the very next day, March 6, the prosecutor sent a team of investigators to the couple's residence. The search of the Cochran house was conducted with special care, trying to find any traces indicating the possible involvement of Kelly and Jason in the disappearance of Christopher. However, all efforts were in vain. The only important find was a book, authored by Jason. He used a pseudonym from the world of video games. The title of the work caused a smile, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described murder scenes of everyone who had ever wronged him. The detectives read the book from cover to cover and noticed one of the characters that matched Christopher's characteristics exactly. Suspicions about Jason grew stronger. Perhaps he wasn't making up the crimes, but was inspired by real events he had committed. Given the heightened suspicions, it was decided 3 weeks later to conduct another search of the Cochran house. The investigation hoped to uncover evidence that might have been missed in the previous search. When police officers drove up to the Cochrans' home, they found that no cars were in sight and the yard and driveway were empty. Attempts to knock on the door were fruitless. No one opened the door. It turned out that immediately after the initial search, Kelly and Jason had left town and moved to another state, Indiana. Their quick getaway had investigators worried because they feared they might not be able to find the crucial evidence they had been hunting for months. It was especially important to collect DNA samples from the suspects. That's when Michigan police officers contacted their Indiana counterparts, asking them to take DNA samples instead. Ready to help, the Indiana police officers headed to the Cochrans' new home. The couple, for their part, did not object at all to the procedure, as there was no legitimate reason to charge them with murder. Nor was there any evidence of the victim's body itself. The investigation was gradually losing steam, leaving less and less chance of solving the disappearance of Christopher Regan. Time passed, and suddenly, on February 22, 2016, a call rang out at the police station in Hobart, Indiana. On the other end of the line was a worried Kelly Cochran. She tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing, but in her state of panic and emotional shock, it was difficult to provide specific details. Rescuers arrived on the scene where Kelly, in a state of utter panic, obstructed doctors. However, it soon became clear that Jason would no longer require assistance. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning with fire as if from extreme overheating. The doctors were forced to confirm his death. The body was sent for forensic examination. Kelly was handed over to a police patrol who took her to relatives who lived nearby, down the same street. Determined to find out the circumstances of what happened, investigators searched the Cochrans' new home. During the search, one of the officers discovered a syringe needle at the foot of the marital bed. After evaluating the condition of Jason's body, the investigator concluded that his death was caused by abuse of illegal substances. However, the forensic report came as a surprise to the detectives. Although Jason was found to have an excessive amount of illegal substances in his system, the forensic results pointed to something more shocking. Jason's death was caused by strangulation, as confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. Thus, Jason, the prime suspect in the kidnapping of Christopher Regan, was himself a victim of the crime. This discovery led to new questions and a re-examination of the evidence. Forensic experts immediately turned their attention to Kelly Cochran, who seemed to be the link between the two crimes. Now she was to become the prime suspect not only in Christopher's disappearance, but also in her husband's murder. This investigation became an even more complex puzzle. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly about her involvement in her husband's death and whether she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to him. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and pressure from the investigators, the young woman did not confess to either the murder of her husband or the kidnapping of Christopher. Several months later, investigators have not been able to find convincing evidence of Kelly's guilt, as well as the grounds for a possible arrest. During the course of the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden encountered Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's, who, upon learning of the horrific incident from Kelly herself, immediately rushed to the police. Walter emphasized that illegal drugs could not be the cause of Jason's death, as he knew his friend well, and he would certainly tell him about any changes in his life. Moreover, Jason had been using only medicinal herbs with the sole purpose of getting rid of the back pain that had accompanied him for a long time. However, Walter noticed that his friend had been in a difficult situation lately. In March last year, Jason shared his worries with him, saying that he and Kelly had to travel to Indiana because of suspicions of the Iron River police in their involvement in the disappearance of a man. Everything that had happened had greatly affected Jason. He had even become depressed and tried to take his own life, which required serious treatment. Walter also noted a distinct change in his friend's behavior. Kelly began to take more and more control over his life. It seemed that Jason was constantly on edge. Whereas before the boys could spend hours playing video games together, Jason now began to avoid parties as soon as his wife returned from work. This information became an important link in the investigation and allowed investigators to understand what was going on in the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden began to devise a cunning plan to force Kelly to tell the truth about the fate of Christopher Regan. It was decided to use Walter, Jason's close friend, as bait to lure Kelly into a trap and force her to make a mistake. Walter accepted a difficult role. He was to become a tool in the hands of the investigation and play out a performance in front of Kelly Cochran. On March 12, 2016, he called Kelly while under the watchful eye of police officers equipped with a listening device. He was to give Kelly a fictitious letter from Jason that supposedly contained something important. Walter also told Kelly that her husband had given the letter to her shortly before his death, with the condition that he not open the envelope and immediately send it to the police if anything happened to him. Suddenly, Kelly asked Walter to drop the idea. And this came as a real shock to both Walter and the police officers who had been monitoring the situation. However, despite this revelation, detectives still had no direct evidence. In the weeks that followed, Kelly was subjected to numerous interrogations by investigators in an attempt to get the truth out of her. But she continued to deny her guilt. On April 26, 2016, it suddenly became clear that Kelly Cochran had managed to slip away from the scrutiny of investigators. It was like a mockery of justice. Detectives immediately joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart, announcing a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran.
Walter Hammerman, who cooperated with police, was shocked and frightened. He feared that the perpetrator would never be found and that she could once again get away with it and might later attempt to attack him. Kelly's phone was off, as if she was enjoying a game of cat and mouse with the cops. After 2 busy days full of anxiety and turmoil, Detective Jeremy Ogden managed to find out that Kelly Cochran was off the west coast of the United States. She had cleverly eluded the police and traveled to Kentucky, to the town of Wingo, located more than 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective contacted the local police, warning that upon discovering Kelly, they should arrest her, exercising extreme caution given her potential danger. On April 28th, police officers located Kelly at her cousin's home. The arrest team, responding quickly to the information, proceeded to the house. Knowing that Kelly could be dangerous and prone to escape attempts, they acted quickly and without warning. That afternoon, Kelly Cochran was apprehended and taken into custody. Detective Ogden arrived in Wingo, where he resumed interviews with the suspect along with investigators from Indiana and Michigan. After speaking with Kelly Cochran, everything became clear. The story of her relationship with Christopher Regan was much deeper and more serious than everyone thought. She felt true love for him. Kelly dreamed of leaving this cursed city and starting a new life with him. But everything changed on October 13th, 2015, when Jason found out about her cheating. They were fighting, and Jason remembered the pact the newlyweds made on their wedding night. According to that pact, the cheater was obligated to kill his lover if his cheating became known to his other half. Kelly claimed that she had never taken that agreement seriously. She thought it was a joke. But Jason was serious and warned her that he would do it himself if she didn't keep her vow. Kelly didn't want to take that responsibility, but she helped Jason commit this horrible crime. On the evening of October 14, 2015, Christopher Regan arrived at the home of his mistress, Kelly Cochran. It was a moment he wanted to enjoy their encounter while Kelly's husband was away. The young woman offered him dinner, then a pleasant time and intimacy. Everything was going according to plan. Their evening promised to be special. The lovers had dinner and, according to Kelly, went up to the second floor of the house, but their solitude was interrupted by Jason's sudden appearance. He burst into the bedroom with a rifle in his hands. Panicked and terrified, Christopher realized he was in a death trap. Jason, without hesitation, took aim and fired a shot at Christopher's head. The bullet mortally wounded him, and Chris died on the spot. Afterward, under Jason's direction, the accomplices dragged the body into the basement and began dismembering it using a hacksaw. Christopher's limbs and head were detached from the torso. The perpetrators placed the remains in several trash bags and then disposed of them by dumping them in the woods near the village of Crystal Falls. They drove Christopher's car away from the house to ward off suspicion. The couple thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. The couple were accomplices to a terrible crime. Kelly Cochran also did not hide her participation in the tragic death of her husband. According to her, the idea of revenge was born when Jason, having discovered that Kelly had a lover, decided to commit the crime. Kelly, in turn, wanted to get back at him for the loss of happiness with the man she loved. She confessed that she was deeply in love with Christopher and felt that her spouse deprived her of the opportunity to be happy. She never could come to terms with the loss and the pain she felt on a daily basis. Kelly hated her husband for what he had forced her to do and realized she couldn't continue to live peacefully with it.
The opportunity for a crime came on February 22, 2016, when Jason complained of back pain. Kelly talked him into giving him a shot with a medication. The dose of the medication was too high, but for some reason it didn't work properly. Seeing that her husband was still breathing, Kelly suffocated Jason by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. Later, just in case, Kelly squeezed his neck to make sure her husband was already dead. This explained the appearance of bruises on the victim's body. After Kelly Cochran's testimony, she actively cooperated with police to help determine where Christopher's remains were buried. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden, along with a team of investigators and a canine team, went to a site near the village of Crystal Falls. This seldom visited neighborhood had become the hiding place of a terrible mystery. The team of investigators began a thorough sweep of the woods around the lake, each member carefully penetrating between the trees. One of the canine dogs suddenly detected a faint odor and led the officers forward. All the other officers followed the dog tensely, expecting the reveal to be close. The dog led the group to an unassuming hill littered with fallen leaves and branches. Clearing it, the investigators found objects. One of them was unmistakably a human skull. Upon closer examination, it was obvious that the victim had been murdered. The bullet hole spoke for itself. Investigators had no doubt that they had discovered Christopher's severed head. Also found at the scene was a .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses that probably belonged to Reagan. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains. The missing person case that had plagued investigators for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Regan and Jason Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old criminal was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor emphasized that Kelly significantly diminishes her role by being the mastermind behind both crimes. He argued that Christopher viewed his relationship with Kelly as an occasional encounter, while she genuinely loved him and planned a future with him. Christopher's refusal to have a serious relationship with her led to rage, and Kelly decided to kill him by making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession. In court, however, she presented a different version. According to her, she was being abused by her jealous husband, who arranged the crime. He hid in the basement that day and caught the lovers off guard. Then he grabbed a gun in a rage and shot Christopher. The idea of dismembering the body was Jason's suggestion, and he coerced Kelly into helping by threatening to kill him. The new version made the jury wonder about Kelly's guilt. They deliberated for 3 hours and still reached their verdict. Kelly was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Christopher Regan. She was given a life sentence without parole. Jason Cochran's case did not go to trial, as a plea agreement was reached and Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison. From the courtroom, Kelly Cochran was sent straight to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. There she is, serving her sentence, and only regrets that her personal life did not work out. In one phone interview, Kelly stated, "I tried to do what I thought was right. You go to school, you go to college, then you get married," Kelly Cochran shares in an interview. "It was good in the beginning, but in the end, all my efforts were in vain. All I did was work all the time while my husband entertained himself with computer games."
Within the prison walls, Kelly continues to reveal details of her creamies. She claims that she and Jason committed more creamies and Christopher is just one of their many victims. The details, names, and additional crimes Kelly does not disclose make it difficult to corroborate her words. Kelly's brother has also heard from her that there were more victims, but there is no concrete evidence to back that up at this time. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department is scrutinizing the details, hoping to uncover some clues and find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jason Cochran, in hopes that this additional evidence will help close a chapter in this dark story.
North Carolina, the birthplace of country, blues, and Cherokee Indians, is now a fairly conservative and prosperous state in the northern part of the South Atlantic states. Unlike South Carolina, the state is fairly quiet in terms of crime, and if it does make the national news networks, it is more often due to snowstorms, tornadoes, and severe thunderstorms. The coast, with tropical storms and flooding, or acres of dense wildlife refuges, with the danger of wildfires and landslides, cause far more danger than people. But not always. On April 10, 2019, it was 17-year-old Tristan Borlasse who caused the storm. The teenager, from a religious large family, rather violently massacred his loved ones at the family home in Deep Gap, North Carolina. On Wednesday evening, emergency services received a call from a young woman reporting a large amount of blood in her home and 3 missing family members, her parents, and younger brother. She added that she couldn't reach them. Police officers responded to the call and immediately drove to Deep Gap, about a mile from the Watauga and Wilkes County border. When patrol officers reached the home, they found blood on the walkway leading to the house, on the mat by the front door, and a blood trail inside the house stretching up the stairs. Officers searching the area outside found the body of a man covered in leaves under a hammock with several stab wounds. A little later, at about 10:30 p.m., the family's pickup truck was found hidden in the woods with the woman's body covered with a blanket and bags of mulch placed on top. A senseless, impulsive domestic tragedy. Jeffrey Borlasse, Tristan's father, was born on April 16, 1975, the pastor of the conservative Pietist Bible Fellowship Church, a Protestant religious movement with Mennonite roots. The boy was brought up in an atmosphere of special importance of personal piety and the feeling of being constantly under the strict and watchful eye of God. Serious and careful study of the Bible in the meetings and moral instruction were the foundation of his upbringing. Any kind of entertainment, even laughter and colorful clothing, was frowned upon. Good works, charity, missionary work, love for the enemy, and renunciation of all kinds of violence were considered virtuous. Jeffrey absorbed all these fundamentals as the son of Pastor Harry Borlasse. He grew up a kind, loving, gentle, and patient boy. As a young man, Jeffrey got a summer job at the Big Surf Water Park, located on Lake of the Ozarks in the U.S. state of Missouri. On his first day of work, the young man met a charming, meek girl. Her name was Tanya Mae Trandom. Same age, same views, and virtually the same upbringing. Tanya, like Jeffrey, had grown up in a family where Christian values were paramount. Patient, humble, selfless girl saw in the pious young man an ideal future husband and caring father. She gave Jeffrey a picture of an elderly couple holding hands and said, That will be us one day. Jeffrey's mother, Kathy Brown, prayed that God would give her son a wife who loved the Lord with all her heart and believed her prayers were answered. The young lovers married, and their family became a continuation of the ideas in which they themselves were raised. The photo presented by Tanya was carefully kept in the family album. Quite quickly, the young couple had their first child, an adorable girl named Taylor. Then, one after another, came 3 more children. The youngest was a son, whom the parents named Tristan. Taylor became the truest big sister to her siblings. She took care of everyone, helped everyone, supported everyone, but especially the girl was friends with her younger brother. For Tristan, Taylor became the best and only friend. Despite the age difference, they were everywhere together. They played sports, were fond of music, and pranked together. Pietism believes that the task of parenting is to establish the kingdom of God in the child's heart. As the 4 children grew older, Jeffrey and Tanya decided to fulfill their Christian duty and adopted 4 more boys from the orphanage. Open, loving, and friendly, according to others, the family became even larger with a total of 8 children. Taylor, twins Kaya and Alexis, Misery, Al, Stephen, Meliku, and Tristan. According to the family's religious beliefs, children were forbidden to use cell phones and social networks until a certain age, and asceticism in needs and desires was encouraged. Boys were forbidden to date girls until the end of high school, that is, until the age of 18. Bible study and other religious matters were mandatory. Otherwise, children grew up like any other boys and girls. Parents made no distinction between native and adopted children. They were all given the same attention, care, and affection. The loving mother created a harmonious atmosphere and carefully watched the internal order, relations between brothers and sisters, prayed a lot, and did good deeds. The couple believed that virtue should be nurtured by their own actions and taught their children mercy by example. When the people of Haiti were hit by a hurricane, Tanya sold her expensive wedding ring and sent the proceeds to a foundation building housing for the victims. In return, she bought herself a simple, regular, cheap ring. In 2015, Taylor graduated from high school and moved to Boone to attend Appalachian State University. This event hurt Tristan deeply. He lost his only friend and was alone. Taylor came home at the first opportunity, but now she had her own free life, and Tristan was left with the same old rules and routines. He had rebelled against the restrictions set since childhood and disagreed with his parents' religious views. He was annoyed by the lack of a cell phone and the inability to communicate with his peers on social networks, especially since such communication has become an integral part of the life of modern teenagers. After Taylor's departure, quarrels with his parents only became more frequent. In December 2017, there were pleasant changes in the life of the family. Jeffrey and his wife and children moved to a new house with a large lot in Deep Gap, Watauga County in North Carolina. The house was located on a dirt road leading into a wooded area and was much more spacious than the previous home. In addition, the new dwelling was just under 2 miles from the home of Robin, Tanya's mother, and the children's grandmother. The close proximity made it possible to call on her at any time if help was needed in looking after the youngest children. Whether the move had been as pleasant a change for Tristan was unknown, for he had to change his school and his surroundings. In Watauga, he went to the local high school and started track and field. Other kids took jobs as counselors at summer camps. At first glance, it might have seemed that there was never any trouble in the Borlas household, but that was not the case. Over time, Tristan's behavior became troubling. In 2018, the school insisted on several consultations with a psychologist about anger issues and a lack of impulsive behavior control. By 2019, when the young man was in high school, despite his excellent abilities, he began to have trouble understanding some school subjects, and these difficulties only increased with each passing day. From a diligent student who had always participated in the life of the school before the move, he turned into an indifferent, withdrawn teenager who lost interest in his studies. Tristan began to be late for lessons and had no desire to learn at all. It got to the point where he would put his headphones on during class and sit with an absent look. Some teachers tried to help Tristan, and he even made contact, but everything ended with unchanged indifference and lack of interest. Besides, the young man did not always behave adequately at home. By this time, he already had everything he constantly argued with his parents about: his own cell phone and access to social networks. Tristan spent a lot of time on the internet. In his Instagram account, he referred to himself as a musician. Taylor was constantly interested in the lives of her siblings and noticed that Tristan quarreled with his parents more often and argued with his mom about religious topics. She learned of his other problems at school as well. The sister tried to talk to her brother, but the former closeness was no longer there.
After a while, the young man became friends with a girl from the religious community, Evelyn Faith Jackson. They began to meet, not particularly observing the prohibition on intimate relations. Sometimes they smoked forbidden plants, and Tristan complained about his mother, who at night discusses his behavior with him, which made Tristan tired and unable to concentrate in school. The young man was very worried that he has many faults that make him not live up to his mother's expectations, and she cannot be proud of him. Told that with his father he can be himself, but with his mother it is different. On April 10, 2019, a lot of secret things from Tristan's life came to light. Surveillance cameras were installed in the barn where the goats were kept, and Tristan's old cell phone, which he sometimes used secretly from his parents, was used as an access point. On this day, Tanya took the phone for some reason and read text messages in which her son was having sexual conversations with girls and discussing illegal drugs with them. Tristan was at school at the time and saw his phone start blinking with incoming messages. Shocked parents wrote to him in a family chat about the information found on Tristan's old phone. That same day, Sherry King, an English teacher in Tristan's class, called his mother with complaints about the teenager's grades and behavior. She would later testify at trial that Tanya Borlaz called her back and told her that she and her husband would be at the school soon and would pick Tristan up early to discuss his grades with him. Sherry King relayed her parents' words to Tristan, who was extremely surprised by the news. The couple left their youngest child with his grandmother and went to the middle school to deal with what was going on. The ride home passed in silence. At trial, Tristan will testify that the mother seemed tense and frowned constantly while leafing through his phone. A conversation took place at home that lasted about an hour and a half, after which Tanya texted her mother and told her that Tristan was not upset that they had taken away his phone and car keys until grades and behavior improved, and she would be coming to pick up the younger child soon. The message was sent at 4 p.m., after which the conversation apparently continued. From Tristan's words, he and his mother talked about the need to do well in school, cleanliness in relationships with girls, the dangers of illegal drugs, and that she did not want him to study religions other than Christianity. He was forced to listen and realized how much there was in him that should be corrected. They even made a list of qualities he should have to become a better person: compassion, honesty. This list the police would later find. At one point, Tristan said his mother approached him from behind, put her arm around his neck and applied pressure, causing him to instinctively jump up, turn around, and accidentally elbow her. According to him, his mother had never done anything like that, and that's why he reacted that way. His mother was startled by the blow, grabbed what he thought was a pair of scissors from a shelf, and moved toward her son. He, being in shock at what was happening, stabbed her, thinking he was defending himself, and ran to his father for help. Later, forensic examination will find no evidence on Tristan's neck that his mother strangled him. And during the trial, the prosecution will show the jury photos of Tanya Borlas's neck taken by the medical examiner that show a broken neck bone. The psychologist, on the other hand, will show during the trial that, in his opinion, Tristan Borlas was mentally sane at the time of the crime, but suffered from a severely impaired cognitive state, experiencing depersonalization, derealization, and feeling events unreal. However, the court and jury would disregard the psychologist's opinion, finding Tristan to be a skillful manipulator and a socially dangerous individual. According to Tristan, he did not understand what was happening, why his father was running away from him, and why he stabbed his father when he caught up, even though he was begging him for help. He remembered his father picking up a rock and saying, "Tristan, don't," but was certain that his father would rather let him be killed than try to harm him. Neighbors later reported hearing loud screams on the Borlas property at about 5:30 p.m. that Wednesday. After it was over, Tristan returned to the house, where he vomited, which, in the psychologist's opinion, indicated severe stress, not cold-blooded, calculated murder. However, the jury disagreed with the psychologist's opinion. After all, they were presented with the forensic medical examiner's reports at trial. Jeffrey Borlas's autopsy report noted multiple stab wounds to the left chest and back, slash wounds to the arms and hands, and abrasions to the skull and forehead. Tanya Borlas's autopsy report indicated that she suffered multiple stab wounds, including to her left chest, back, and arm, as well as injuries that may have been sustained when her neck was compressed. The results indicate that the parents were defending themselves, not attacking. In addition, Tristan had a chance to get away from his mother if he felt threatened, and even if the mother was the victim of a sudden lapse of judgment and misperception of self-defense, the father's murder and subsequent actions already looked different. Tristan returned to the house, removed his mother's body and placed it in the truck, hiding it under a tarp. He then cleaned up the crime scene for about an hour and even used a hose to wash the porch outside the house. Around 8:30 p.m., Tristan arrived at his grandmother's house to pick up his younger brother. Robin thought this seemed extremely strange. Tristan explained that his parents urgently needed to go to the store and apologized that they didn't have time to stop by and pick up his brother. About 20 minutes later, Robin received a call from her other grandson, complaining that his parents were not answering the phone and had not come to pick him up from his part-time job as they usually did. Grandma dialed Alexis and asked her to go get her brother. They agreed that they would meet at Jeffrey and Tanya's house and figure out what had happened. As they drove up to the house, Robin noticed blood on the porch, but since the couple raised animals, she wasn't particularly concerned. She went into the house to get a flashlight to go check on the animals and saw that there was blood everywhere. At that time, Alexis ran into the house and reported that she had found some kind of body under the hammock near the animal barn, and she thought she saw Tristan with blood on his face in a getaway car. Alexis called emergency services. The operator told her, along with all family members, to lock themselves in the car and wait for the police to arrive. The police arrived 10 minutes later. After several hours of waiting outside and talking to officers, they were all taken to the station, where they were told that Jeffrey and Tanya Borlasi had been found dead. While examining the crime scene, detectives located a computer interface in the home that connected the video surveillance system located inside the home to the monitors. Detectives saw a screen on the monitor with a grid of various cameras broadcasting live video. They immediately requested a warrant to obtain the credentials from the system's servicing company. Meanwhile, Tristan contacted his girlfriend Evelyn and arrived at her home. She realized that he was worried about something, and he had a few scratches on his forehead and arms. Tristan assured her, however, that he had only had an argument with his parents and had gotten the scratches while playing with his dog. Evelyn described Tristan's injuries as 3 scratches on his forehead, a wound on his hand, a cut on his finger, and a bruised fingernail. Immediately after the crime, Tristan posted a photo of the injuries on Snapchat, writing that he was hurt by his father's dog. According to his girlfriend, the photo matched the injuries she saw on him that evening. Tristan stayed the night. The next morning, they went to Walmart and McDonald's and were going to go to school, but then changed their minds. Evelyn was convinced that Tristan just wanted to get away from his parents for a while, so she offered to stay with one of her relatives for a while. He agreed, and they traveled to another state. On April 11th, Sheriff's Office personnel obtained the username and password to the video surveillance system at the Borleys' home. They reviewed the camera footage and learned the circumstances of the crime. Police obtained a warrant for Tristan's arrest and turned over the details of the vehicle he allegedly drove away to the National Crime Information Center. A search for the car and subsequently, a chase began. Investigator Matthew received information that Tristan had been seen in Tennessee and began the paperwork involved in extraditing the alleged perpetrator. He asked Robin, Tristan's grandmother, to go with him to the apprehension so that he could talk to the young man in her presence, given his young age. As they drove in the car with Evelyn, Tristan noticed blue lights following them.
He sped up and told his friend that his parents must have registered the car as stolen to find him. He sped down the highway, trying to pull away, but eventually gave in to his pursuers and pulled over. The Ford was surrounded by police cars. Evelyn was completely confused when she saw her boyfriend being handcuffed and taken away in a squad car. The officers noticed that Tristan did not appear upset or agitated. His April 11, 2019 interview, which was conducted by investigator Matthew, was videotaped and audio recorded. The young man answered all questions, confessed to the crime, and detailed all his actions. At times, he cried. Tristan Borlas, who was a month away from his 18th birthday, was taken into custody without bail. A little later, the sheriff's office obtained a warrant to investigate Tristan's Snapchat account and a total of 5 of his cell phones that may have contained information related to the crime. A search warrant was also issued for the Orchard Road home, where detectives found another phone found in the master bedroom, a keyboard and pen from a safe, paper cups, a hammer, a straw, knives, a red-stained swab, eyeglasses, a kitchen towel, a hammock, a digital video recorder, a rug and miscellaneous papers, South Dakota cards, and boots. According to court documents, a search warrant was also issued for the Ford F-150 truck, and a red-stained swab, laptop computer, charger, and steering wheel cover were seized. A warrant was also issued to search the home of Tristan's girlfriend in Boone, as the young man was spending the night at her house. Court documents say a pillowcase, a zippered sweatshirt, and a notebook were seized from the property. The results of the investigations and searches helped investigators reconstruct the chronology of events down to the smallest moments. The version of self-defense was considered untenable. Funeral services for the couple were held on April 17, 2019 at Bible Fellowship Church. Pastors William Krantz and Brad Gray officiated the ceremony. The children, experiencing the loss of their parents at such an early age, found the strength to write a touching obituary. Our parents never got the opportunity to live for themselves because they always lived for us. Jeff and Tanya have always been an incredible joy to their parents and always a source of pride. Our parents made the world a better place, and we hope to continue that legacy by passionately loving people and pursuing Jesus. After the funeral, Taylor visited her brother in prison for the first time and was unpleasantly struck by his behavior. Not only was Tristan unrepentant, but he tried to blame the family for what had happened. It seemed to her sister that he was convinced he would regain his freedom sooner or later. Taylor felt disgusted, turned around, and left. Her second visit was on May 11th, on the occasion of Tristan's birthday. This time, she came with Grandma Robin, but the meeting was not much different from the previous one. Her brother was praising the party they'd thrown for him at the prison in honor of his birthday. Taylor found the behavior unacceptable, especially since their parents had died tragically. After this visit, the family decided to cut off any contact with Tristan. The trial began on February 16, 2022. At the trial, Tristan expressed regret for what had happened. He agreed with everything his family had said about him and supported the decision for a permanent ban on contact to make the family feel safe. On March 3rd, Tristan Borlas was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each count of first-degree murder. Judge Horn noted that mental health was somewhat of a mitigating factor, as the psychologist's report indicated that Tristan Borlas continued to suffer from anxiety, depression, and had developed symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. However, Judge Horn stated that the psychologist found no evidence of psychotic disorders, although the anxiety and depression may indeed have been exacerbated by the continued use of illegal drugs. The most unusual fact in this story is that neither Tristan's family, nor his lawyer, nor he himself, made any statements about the motives that led to the crime. A pious family and a socially dangerous man using illegal drugs, who himself did not fully understand the reasons for what happened, or competently played the misunderstanding. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, a self-hating young guy with low self-esteem, prone to depression, actively demonstrating symptoms of anxiety and not receiving the necessary qualified medical care. During the court session, the fact of panic attacks, which his mother helped him cope with, as she herself was prone to them, was voiced. One of the main provisions of the pedagogy of pietism, Children burdened with original sin are immoral from birth, and therefore education and school should correct them, preparing them for the correct from the point of view of pietism, behavior in life by establishing strict discipline and suppression of children's self-consciousness. Strict love is supposedly for the good. A child who may have had an inherited overreactivity of the nervous system grew up under strict limits, constantly feeling that he was not a good enough godly person. Some by nature need more love, some less. The little boy was intensely jealous, according to his older sister's recollections, of the new brothers, whose appearance shifted the parents' attention. First, there was rebellion, then depressed moods and feelings of worthlessness, joined by illicit weed, panic attacks, and depersonalization/derealization states. He didn't accept his parents' religiosity. He couldn't be what his mother wanted him to be, and to be what he was, meant to be in need of correction. Was that list of needed fixes that the two of them wrote together with his mom, instead of finding contacts for a good therapist, the last straw? And was there any way to avoid such a senseless and merciless tragedy in a truly loving family?